He had already rescued the boy once from his drunk stepdad. Then the Hell's Angel found him again. The rain hammered against the small windows of the apartment above Voss Motors. It was a steady drumbeat that filled the quiet space. Marla watched the boy on the cot. He was small, curled up under a thick wool blanket she had pulled from a storage trunk. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, still damp from the rain. The swelling around his eye was starting to color, a deep purple bruise blooming like a dark flower. She worked slowly, her large hands gentle as she pressed a cold cloth to his lip. He winced but did not pull away. "What's your name, kid?" she asked. Her voice was rough, but soft around the edges. "Leo," he said. His voice was small. "Leo Kowalski." Marla's hands stopped for just a second. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. Kowalski. But that was a long time ago. This boy was too young. She pushed the thought away. "How old are you, Leo?" 14, Marla nodded and kept working. She dabbed a bit of antiseptic on his split lip. Leo flinched and sucked in air through his teeth. "Sorry," she muttered daintily. "Got to clean it." "It's okay," he said. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I've had worse. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Marla studied him. His eyes were dark like the storm outside, and they held a tiredness that made her chest ache. No 14-year-old should look that weary. He pulled the blanket tighter around his thin shoulders. His knuckles were scraped raw protagonist. No, she corrected herself. His knuckles were scraped from fighting back. "You want to tell me what happened?" she asked. She sat on an old wooden crate across from him, close enough to listen, far enough to give him space. Leo looked down at his hands. "My mom died last spring. After that, Frank started drinking. He got mean." His voice cracked. "Tonight he got worse. He started swinging, so I ran. I didn't know where to go. I just ran." "You ran to my alley," Marla said softly. "You were the only light on." Marla swallowed hard. "He won't come here. He sees this building, he'll know it's mine. I got a reputation." She said it as a fact, not a boast. "Nobody messes with my property." Leo looked up at her. "You a tough lady?" Marla almost smiled. "Tougher than I look." "Good," Leo let out a shaky breath. "Because I don't have anybody else." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Marla felt her chest tighten. She knew what it was like to have nobody. She knew the cold bite of that loneliness all too well. She finished cleaning his cuts and wrapped his ribs with a long bandage. He winced but didn't cry. He just stared at the rain streaking down the window. "I'm not going back there," Leo said quietly. "I don't care what happens. I'm not going back." Marla sat back on her heels. She was a former biker with a criminal record out to here. She had no business caring for a kid. No business at all. But she looked at him, shivering under that blanket, and she felt something crack open in her chest. Something she'd buried a long time ago. "You got somewhere else to go? Family?" Leo shook his head. "No one." "Okay," Marla said slowly. "Okay, you can stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." Leo's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" She stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a thick, faded blanket. She handed it to him. "There's a spare room down the hall. It ain't much. But it's dry, and it's safe." Leo took the blanket. His hands were shaking. "Thank you, Miss Marla." She folded her arms. "Just Marla." "Thank you, Marla." She watched him for a long moment, this scared, bruised kid with nothing but the clothes on his back. She saw herself at his age, hungry, alone, angry at the world. She couldn't fix that old wound, but maybe she could give this kid a better break than she got. The thunder rumbled outside. Rain hammered the roof like angry fists skew. Marla walked to the door and flipped the deadbolt. Then, she moved an old bookshelf in front of it. An old habit. Made her feel safer. Leo watched her from the couch. You really think he'll come back? I think it's better to be ready. Marla walked to the closet and pulled out a shotgun. She didn't load it in front of him. She just laid it across her lap as she sat in the chair by the door. You gonna stay there all night? He asked. I'm gonna stay here all night. Leo blinked, and for the first time since she found him, his shoulders relaxed just a little. Thank you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Marla nodded. A rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The rain drummed against the tin roof of the garage below. It was a steady, patient sound, like a heartbeat for the old building. She watched Leo's breathing slow and deepen. Soon, his face relaxed into sleep. The blanket rose and fell with each quiet breath. Marla stayed in her chair. The shotgun rested across her knees, cold and heavy. She did not sleep. She thought about the rain that had washed the blood from the alley. She thought about the boy's dark eyes, so full of fear and yet so trusting. She thought about the name Kowalski and the ghost it carried. But most of all, she thought about the promise she had just made. She would keep this boy safe. She did not know how, and she did not know what it would cost her post. But she knew one thing for sure. For the first time in 15 years, Marla had a reason to fight for something more than just survival. She settled deeper into the old chair, the shotgun resting across her lap, and listened to the storm rage outside. Leo's breathing grew slow and even. He was asleep. Marla stayed awake, watching the door. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Sunlight crept through the grimy windows of the garage, casting golden stripes across the oil-stained concrete floor. Marla hadn't slept much. She'd spent the night in the chair, her eyes on the door, her ears tuned to every creak and groan of the old building. Now she stood in the doorway of the spare room, watching Leo sleep. One arm was thrown over his face, blocking out the light. He looked smaller in the morning, younger somehow, a kid who should be worrying about homework, not hiding from a man who hit him. Marla turned and walked to the small kitchen nook. She put a pot of coffee on and started chopping potatoes. She wasn't much of a cook, but she could manage breakfast. It was the least she could do. A few minutes later, she heard the creak of floorboards behind her. "Mornin'," she said without turning around. Leo shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. His face still looked rough. The bruise around his eye had turned a deep purple, and his lip was swollen. But he managed a small smile. "Smells good," he said. "Potatoes and eggs. Not fancy, but it'll stick to your ribs." She pushed a plate toward him. He sat down at the small table and stared at the food like he hadn't seen a real meal in days. "Go on," she said. "Eat." He didn't need to be told twice. He ate fast, like he was afraid it would disappear. Marla leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee, watching him. "Slow down," she said gently. "It's not going anywhere." He nodded, but he kept eating at the same pace. When he finished, he set down his fork and looked at her with those tired eyes. "What happens now?" he asked. Marla didn't have an easy answer. She turned to the window and stared at the street outside. A few cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Just a normal morning. First, she said, we get you cleaned up. Then we figure things out. Leo nodded. He looked at his hands, still dirty from yesterday. I don't want to go back, he said quietly. I don't care what happens to me. I just can't go back there. Marla felt a sharp ache in her chest. She remembered that feeling, that desperate, cornered feeling of being trapped with no way out. You're not going back, she said. That's a promise. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd found him in that alley, the fear in his eyes seemed to ease. The morning passed in quiet routines. Marla gave Leo a towel and some old clothes that were too big for Jiménez. He rolled up the sleeves and cinched the waist with a piece of rope. You look like a scarecrow, she said. He laughed. It was a small sound, thin and rusty, like it hadn't been used in a while. Better than what I was wearing, he said. Marla nodded. She couldn't argue with that. She put him to work in the garage, not hard work, just small things. Handing her tools, cleaning parts, holding a light where she needed it. It kept his hands busy and his mind off the trouble waiting outside those doors. He was quick, she noticed. Real quick. He watched her work on an old motorcycle carburetor, his eyes following every move. What's that part? He asked. Needle valve, she said. Controls the fuel flow. He leaned in closer, studying it. How do you know when it's bad? When the engine sputters or floods. You listen to the sound it makes. She looked at him. You know anything about engines? Some, my dad used to. I mean, the man I thought was my dad. He had an old truck. I watched him work on it sometimes. When he wasn't, his voice trailed off. Marla didn't push. She just handed him a wrench. Here, she said. You hold this. I'll show you how to take this apart. For the next hour, she taught him the basics. How to remove the bolts in the right order. How to keep the parts organized. How to be patient with the machine. He listened carefully, asking questions, his hands steady. You got a knack for this, she said. Yeah? He seemed surprised. Yeah, you pay attention. That's half the battle. A small smile crept across his face. It was the first time she'd seen him look proud of something. Around noon, Marla's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. It was a text from Crank, an old friend from her biker days. Heard someone's been asking about a kid. You know anything? Marla's jaw tightened. She typed back. Maybe. Why? Because a man came around last night, drunk, loud, said his boy ran off, said he'd find him. She stared at the phone for a long moment. Then she typed one more message. Thanks. I owe you. She put the phone down and looked at Leo, who was wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. What is it? He asked. Is it him? He's looking for you, Marla said. But he doesn't know you're here. And he's not going to find out. Leo's face went pale. He swallowed hard. What if he does? He whispered. Marla walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it felt heavy with meaning. Then he'll have to go through me, she said. And I've dealt with worse than him. That afternoon, they sat on the front steps of the garage, eating sandwiches. The sun was warm, and the street was quiet concern. Leo had stopped shaking, stopped looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He was starting to relax, just a little. Marla? He said. Yeah? Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. She took a bite of her sandwich and chewed slowly, thinking, because someone should have helped me once, she said. When I was your age, and no one did. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What happened to you?" Marla looked down the street. Her eyes got distant, like she was looking at something far away. "I was a different person back then," she said. "Made a lot of mistakes. Hurt people. Got hurt. Thought I knew everything, but I didn't know anything at all. Do you miss it? That life?" "Sometimes," she said honestly. "The freedom, the road, but not the rest." She turned to look at him. "That life takes things from you, and it doesn't give them back." Leo nodded slowly. "I don't want to be like him," he said. "My stepdad. I don't want to be angry all the time like that." Marla set down her sandwich and faced him fully. "You don't have to be," she said. "You get to choose. Every day, you get to choose who you want to be. The past doesn't have to decide that for you." Leo looked at his hands. Then he looked up at her. "Did you choose?" "Yeah," she said. "I chose to walk away. It wasn't easy. Some days it still isn't. But it's worth it." He nodded slowly, turning her words over in his mind. "I'm glad I ran to your alley," he said. "Out of all the places I could have gone, I'm glad it was you." Marla felt a lump form in her throat. She looked away quickly and cleared it. "Yeah, well," she said gruffly. "Eat your sandwich." He laughed. It was a small sound, rusty around the edge Sestranken, but it was real. That afternoon, Marla walked Leo through the garage. She showed him the tools, the lifts, the bikes in various states of repair. He asked 100 questions, and she answered every one. "This one's a 1975 Harley," she said, pointing to a bike in the corner. "She's a beauty, needs a new clutch, but she's got good bones." "I like her," Leo said. "She looks like she's got stories." Marla smiled. "She's got plenty. Same as me." Leo ran his fingers along the handlebars. Then he looked up at her with a serious expression. "Do you think I could learn to fix bikes?" he asked. "Really fix them, I mean?" "I don't see why not," she said. "You got good hands, an eye for detail, and you listen. That's more than half the battle." He beamed at that, and for a moment, he looked like a regular kid. Later that evening, Marla heated up some stew she'd made the day before. They ate at the small table in the apartment. Leo talked about his mom, the way she used to sing while she cooked. His voice got soft when he talked about her. "She had a good voice," he said. "She used to sing this old song about a bluebird. I can't remember the rest. I bet she sang it to you a lot," Marla said. "Yeah." He smiled every night before bed. The silence that followed was comfortable, the good kind. After dinner, Marla pulled an old blanket from the closet and handed it to him. "It's not much," she said, "but it'll keep you warm." Leo took it and hugged it to his chest. "Thank you, Marla," she nodded. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start looking into things. Legal stuff. See what options we got." He walked toward the stairs, then stopped and turned around. "Hey, Marla. Yeah? You're not gonna let anything happen to me, right?" She met his eyes. There was hope there, mixed with fear. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not." He nodded once, then headed up the stairs. Marla stood in the quiet garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal. She looked at her hands. They were scarred, calloused, rough, hands that had made a lot of mistakes, hands that had done some things she wasn't proud of. But maybe those hands could do some good now. She held her breath and listened. The light footsteps upstairs stopped. Then a soft creak as Leo lay down on the cot. And for the first time in a long time, Marla felt something like purpose settle in her chest. She locked the doors, checked the windows, and turned off the lights. Then, she sat in her old chair in the corner, listening to the sounds of the boy sleeping above her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anyone take him back. 3 days had passed since Leo came into her life. The garage had settled into a new rhythm. Marla found herself checking on him more than she meant to, not because she didn't trust him, because she was starting to care. Saturday morning arrived clear and bright. Marla had an old Dodge Ram on the lift, a 1998 model with a tired engine and a slow oil leak. She was underneath it, wrench in hand, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Leo appeared at the bottom of the steps, wearing a pair of coveralls she'd picked up at the thrift store. They were too big in the shoulders and too short in the legs, but he'd rolled the sleeves up and cinched the waist with a piece of wire. "Those fit you real good," Marla said, a hint of a smile on her lips. Leo looked down at himself and shrugged. "They're better than my old clothes. Those still smell like smoke. Give 'em a wash later. We'll figure out something better." She slid out from under the truck and stood up, wiping her hands on an old rag. The oil pan sat on the floor, dark and full. "Come here," she said. "I'll show you something." Leo walked over, curious. He stood beside her, looking at the drain pan. "This is the oil," she said. "Old oil. It's been working hard, moving through the engine, keeping everything smooth. But nothing lasts forever. After a while, it breaks down. Gets dirty. Can't do its job no more." She pointed to the new oil filter sitting on the workbench. "So we drain the old stuff out. Replace the filter. Put in fresh oil. Engine runs smooth again." Leo nodded, taking it all in. "Is there different kinds of oil?" "Yep, 2 main kinds. Synthetic and conventional." "What's the difference?" Marla leaned against the workbench. She talked slow, not like she was teaching, but like she was telling a story. Conventional oil comes straight from the ground. It's refined, cleaned up, put in a bottle. It works fine for most cars. But it breaks down faster in heat. Synthetic oil, that's made in a lab. It's built to handle higher temperatures. Lasts longer. Costs more too. Leo thought about that for a moment. "So, synthetic is better?" "Depends on the car. Depends on the engine. Some engines like it simple. Some need the extra protection." She looked at him. "It's like people, I guess. Everyone's got different needs. You just got to figure out what works." Leo smiled a little. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," she said. "But it's worth learning." She handed him a rag and pointed to the bolt on the oil pan. "You want to help me finish this up?" For the next few hours, they worked side by side. Marla drained the rest of the oil, replaced the filter, and refilled the engine with fresh synthetic. Leo handed her tools, asked questions, and paid attention to every answer. "See this bolt here?" Marla said, pointing at a rusty one on the fender. "That's been sitting there for years. It's corroded, stuck. You can't just yank it out. You got to work with it." She grabbed a can of WD-40 and sprayed the bolt generously. "Give it a minute to soak in. Then you apply steady pressure. No jerking, no forcing, just patience." Leo watched, fascinated. "Can I try?" Marla hesitated for just a moment. Then she handed him the wrench. "Go ahead. Show me what you got." Leo knelt down and positioned the wrench on the bolt. He sprayed a little more WD-40 and waited. Then he started to turn. It didn't move. He pushed harder. Still nothing. "Easy," Marla said. Don't force it. Let the oil do the work. He took a breath and tried again. Slow, steady, he could feel the bolt giving, just a little. There you go, Marla said. Keep going. He kept turning. The bolt resisted, fought him, but he didn't give up. He leaned into it, his jaw set, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with a groan of protest and a sudden give, the bolt came loose. It popped free and clattered to the floor. Leo stared at it for a moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a small laugh. It was a bright, genuine sound that filled the garage and bounced off the walls. It caught Marla off guard. She felt the corners of her own mouth twitch upward before she could stop them. Nice work, she said. Leo looked up at her, his face flushed with pride. I did it. You sure did. He picked up the bolt and turned it over in his hand, like it was a trophy. Then he laughed again, softer this time, and shook his head. I can't believe that. I've never done anything like that before. You will again, Marla said. You got the touch. She watched him as he examined the bolt. His grin was wide and easy. It lit up his whole face. And in that moment, Marla felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a small crack in the wall she'd built around her heart years ago. A crack that let a little light in. This boy. This strange, quiet, brave boy. He was easing into her life, slow and steady, like that bolt he'd just loosened. And she wasn't sure she minded. Not one bit. 1 full week had passed since the alley rescue. The garage had become a different place. The air felt lighter. The dust seemed less gray. Even the old radio on the shelf, covered in years of grime, seemed to hum a little sweeter. Marla stood at the workbench with her hands buried in the guts of a carburetor. It was a tired piece from a 1985 Chevy pickup, gummed up with years of dirt and varnish. She had a flathead screwdriver in one hand and a can of carb cleaner in the other. Leo sat across from her on a rolling stool. The coveralls had grown on him. He wore them like a uniform now, proud and careful. He had taken them off the night before and folded them neatly on the chair by his cot. Marla had noticed. They worked in comfortable silence. Classic rock played low on the dusty radio. A song about highways and heartbreak drifted through the garage. Marla hummed along without thinking about it. She reached for a small jet and couldn't find it. She frowned and looked around the workbench. Then she spotted it in a clean little tray beside Leo. He had arranged the parts by size, smallest to largest, near to far, neat as a row of buttons. How'd you learn to do that? She asked. Leo looked up. Do what? Organize, by size, without me saying nothing. He shrugged. It just makes sense. When everything's in order, you don't have to search for nothing. You know where it is. You can focus on the work. Marla looked at him for a long moment. She didn't say anything. She just nodded and went back to the carburetor. But something settled in her chest. Something warm. They worked for another hour. Marla showed him how to clean the jets and check the floats. Leo listened. He asked questions. Good questions. Questions that showed he was thinking, not just copying. See this passage here? She said, pointing at a thin channel in the carb body. Fuel flows through here. If it gets clogged, the engine starves. Can't run right. You got to keep it clear. Leo leaned in and studied it. So it's like the veins in your body. If they get blocked, your heart can't work. Marla blinked. Yeah, something like that. They took a break around noon. Marla made sandwiches with the bread and ham she'd picked up at the corner store. Leo ate his in 4 big bites and looked like he wanted more. "Help yourself," she said, pushing the plate toward him. "There's more in the fridge." He took another sandwich and ate it slower this time. While he chewed, he pulled out a spiral notebook from the pocket of his coveralls. It was beat up, the corners curled, the pages soft and worn. "What you got there?" Marla asked. Leo hesitated for a moment. Then he opened it and held it out to her. Her breath caught. Pages and pages of drawings. Engines, pistons, cylinder heads, crankshafts, all rendered in careful pencil strokes. Some were rough sketches, others were detailed diagrams with arrows and labels. He had drawn the carburetor they were working on. He had drawn her truck. He had drawn an engine from memory, labeled every part. "You drew these?" she asked. He nodded, suddenly shy. "When I get bored. Or when I can't sleep. It helps me think." Marla turned the pages slowly. She saw a drawing of a V8 engine with the intake manifold shaded in pencil. She saw a sketch of a clutch assembly with the flywheel lettered in neat print. "Leo, this is real good work." He ducked his head, but he was smiling. "I just like engines. They make sense to me. Seems like you got a gift for it." He shrugged, but the smile stayed. Marla closed the notebook and handed it back to him. She looked at him. Really looked at him. The grease on his hands, the spark in his eyes, the way he held the notebook like it was a treasure. "Have you ever thought about doing this for a living?" she asked. "Working on cars? Trucks? Making engines run?" Leo blinked. He looked at his hands, then back at the notebook. "I don't know. Nobody ever said I could. I never really thought about the future much. It was always just getting through the day." Marla felt a sharp ache in her throat. She swallowed it down. "Well," she said, her voice gruff, "you got time to think about it now. You got a gift, kid. That's worth something." Leo looked at her. His eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something else. Something like hope. "Thanks, Marla." She nodded and handed him the screwdriver. "Come on. Let's finish this carburetor." They worked until the afternoon slipped into evening. The light through the garage windows turned golden and then soft gray. The radio played a slow ballad. Marla didn't know the name of the song. It didn't matter. The carburetor was back together, shiny and clean, ready to go back on the truck. Marla set it aside and stretched her back. She turned to say something to Leo and saw him slumped over the workbench. His head rested on his folded arms. The spiral notebook was open beneath him. A pencil was still in his hand. He was asleep. He had a smudge of grease on his cheek, right below his eye. It looked like a dark tear. Marla stood there for a long moment and just watched him, the rise and fall of his shoulders, the slow, steady breathing of a boy who felt safe enough to rest. She moved slowly. Gently, she lifted him in her arms, careful not to wake him. He was light, too light. She carried him up the stairs, her boots heavy on the wooden steps. She laid him down on the cot and pulled the blanket up to his chin. She tucked the corners in the way her mother used to do for her. Then she stood back and looked at him. This boy, this strange, beautiful, brave boy. She walked to the kitchen and picked up her phone. She found Ruth's number. Ruth had been her lawyer for years, the one who helped her get the garage, the one who kept her out of trouble. Ruth answered on the second ring. "Marla? You okay?" "Ruth, I need to ask you something." "Sure, what's up?" Marla looked back toward the stairs. toward the boy sleeping in the tiny room above her garage. What does it take to file for emergency guardianship of a kid with no family and nowhere safe to go? The line went quiet for a moment. Then Ruth spoke, her voice careful. Marla, are you thinking about taking in a child? Just tell me what it takes, Ruth. Another pause. It's complicated. You'll need to show he has no safe placement. You'll need a good reason the state should place him with you instead of foster care. Okay, you got a lot of paperwork to do. Background checks, home visits, and you'll need to prove you can provide for him. I can. You sound sure. Marla looked at the stairs again. She thought about the way Leo had smiled when he tightened that bolt. She thought about the drawings in his notebook. She thought about the grease on his cheek and the way he slept so sound now because he knew, for the first time in a long time, that he was safe. I'm sure, Ruth. What do I need to do? Sunday morning came in soft and quiet. The sun slipped through the dusty garage windows in pale yellow ribbons. Marla was already awake. She had been awake since 5, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment above the shop, thinking about Ruth's words from the night before. Guardianship, background checks, home visits, paperwork. It felt like a mountain. But she had climbed mountains before. She had the scars to prove it. She made coffee and drank it standing at the kitchen counter. A few minutes later, she heard the soft creak of the stairs. Leo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. His hair stuck up in every direction. His cheek still had the faint trace of grease from yesterday. Morning, she said. Morning, he yawned. What are we doing today? Marla set down her mug. She had thought about this all night. Ruth had given her a list of steps. The first one was simple. Get his bruises documented. Photographed professional evidence that showed what had happened to him. First, we're going to see a nurse. Get your arms and ribs looked at. Some pictures taken. Leo's face tightened. He looked down at his hands. Why? Because we need proof. Proof of what he did to you. It helps with the legal stuff. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Okay. After that, I'm buying you pancakes. Biggest stack they got. A small smile cracked through his careful mask. Pancakes? The kind with syrup. Butter. The works. Okay, he said again. This time the words sounded lighter. They took her old pickup. The engine rumbled to life with a familiar growl. Leo sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window as they drove through the Sunday streets. The town was quiet. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. Marla kept one hand on the wheel and one eye on the boy beside her. The free clinic was a small brick building on the edge of town. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and old paper. A nurse with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair took them back to a small examination room. Marla stayed with him. She watched as Leo pulled up his sleeves. The bruises had faded some, but they were still there, purple and green and yellow around the edges. The nurse photographed them from every angle. She wrote notes in a file. She was gentle. She didn't ask questions that hurt. When it was over, she put a hand on Leo's shoulder and said, "You're safe now, honey." Leo didn't say anything. But he looked at Marla. And Marla nodded. The diner was across town. A place called Rosie's, with red vinyl booths and a counter lined with chrome stools. The floor was checkered black and white. The air smelled like bacon and coffee and warm bread. They slid into a booth by the window. The Sunday light poured in, and made everything look soft and golden. A waitress with a beehive haircut and a pencil behind her ear came over with 2 menus. "What can I get you, hon?" 2 stacks of pancakes, Marla said. 1 with blueberries, 1 with chocolate chips, a side of bacon, 2 orange juices. The waitress wrote it down without missing a beat. "You got it, sugar." Leo looked at the menu anyway, like he was memorizing it. Then he pulled out his spiral notebook and a pencil from his pocket. He started sketching. Marla watched him. His tongue poked out slightly when he concentrated. He drew with quick, sure strokes, no hesitations. Lines went down and stayed down. "What you drawing?" she asked. He turned the notebook around. It was a garage, not a real one, a dream one, big glass windows, lifts for cars, a paint booth in the back, a sign above the door that read Leo's Auto Works. There were little figures working under cars, a woman with a ponytail holding a wrench, a boy handing her a socket. Marla stared at it for a long moment. Her throat tightened. "That's a good drawing," she said, her voice rough. "Maybe someday," he said quietly. "Maybe someday," she agreed. The pancakes came. They were enormous, golden brown with butter melting into the tops and syrup pooling in the ridges. Leo's eyes went wide. He cut a huge bite and put it in his mouth. He chewed and then stopped. He looked at his plate. Then he looked at Marla. "This is the best thing I've ever eaten," he said. Marla laughed. A real laugh. It startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that. While Leo worked through his stack, Marla pulled out her phone. She found the tip line for the County Child Protection Services. Her thumb hovered over the number. She looked at Leo. He was sketching again on a paper napkin, drawing a car with a big engine and a smiling sun in the corner. She typed the report. A drunk man, an alley, a teenage boy beaten. She gave the location. She gave the incident date. She did not give her name. Anonymous, that was the way Ruth said to do it. It started a paper trail. It protected her. It protected Leo. She hit send. The phone buzzed. Confirmation. She slipped it back into her pocket and took a bite of her pancakes. They were good, warm and sweet and thick. She finished her whole plate. They drove home in the early afternoon. The sun was high and bright. Leo leaned his head against the window. He was sleepy, full of pancakes, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen him before. "Good day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "Real good." She smiled. It felt natural now. They pulled into the gravel lot of Voss Motors. Marla killed the engine. The garage looked quiet. Normal, she got out and stretched. Leo followed. She walked around the side of the building to check the door, a habit she had picked up years ago. It was an old wooden door. Weathered gray paint. Heavy latch. The latch was scratched. Not just scratched, gouged, deep lines in the metal like someone had tried to pick the lock with a knife. She went still. Her heart started pumping hard. She walked to the front of the garage. Her office door was a steel door with a faded white paint job. She stopped when she saw it. A sticker. Large and black. It was a serpent coiled around a wheel. Iron Serpent's Motorcycle Club. It was slapped right in the middle of her office door. She tore it off in one sharp motion, crumpled it in her fist. Her hands were shaking. She turned around. Leo was standing at the corner of the building, still sleepy, not looking her way. He hadn't seen it. She shoved the crumpled sticker into her pocket and forced her face to relax. Come on, kid. Let's get you inside. He nodded and headed up the stairs to the apartment. As soon as he was out of sight, she pulled out her phone and called Crank. He answered on the third ring. Voss, long time. Crank, I got a problem. Name it. She opened her fist and looked at the crumpled sticker. The serpents know where I live. Monday afternoon came in with a low gray sky. The air felt thick and heavy, like a storm was holding its breath somewhere out past the hills. Marla had been up since 4, scrubbing the garage like her life depended on it. She had swept the floors twice, wiped down every tool on the pegboard, polished the coffee maker in the corner. She had even straightened the old calendars on the wall, the ones with the faded pictures of cars and trucks. The place hadn't looked this clean since she first opened the doors. The call from Ruth had come that morning. A county social worker named Denise would be coming by. She was with the Child Protection Office. A good woman, Ruth had said. Fair, thorough, the kind who paid attention to details. Marla wiped her hands on her rag for the 10th time and looked at her reflection in the window. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her shirt was clean. She still looked like a biker. That was fine. She wasn't going to pretend to be something she wasn't. The car pulled up at 2 o'clock, a small blue sedan. The woman who got out was maybe 50, with short gray hair and a kind face. She wore slacks and a sensible jacket. No uniform, no badge, just a clipboard and a smile that seemed genuine. Marla met her at the door. Denise? That's me. You must be Marla. Yep, thanks for coming out. Denise looked around the garage. Her eyes took in the clean floors, the organized tools, the careful attention to detail. She nodded approvingly. Nice place. How long have you been here? 10 years. Built it up from nothing. Impressive, inside the apartment, Denise sat at the small kitchen table. Leo sat across from her, his hands folded in his lap. Marla hovered for a moment at the doorway, then caught herself. She was hovering. She needed to give them space. I'm going to step out for a minute, Marla said. Denise, you want some coffee? That would be wonderful, thank you. Marla went back down to the garage. The stairs creaked under her boots. She found things to do. She sorted bolts by size. She organized the socket wrenches. She wiped down a workbench that was already spotless. Her hands moved, but her mind was upstairs, in that small room with that boy and that social worker. She could hear their voices through the floor. Low and steady. Denise asking gentle questions, Leo answering in his quiet way. She tried not to listen. She failed. He drinks every night, Leo was saying, and when he drinks, he gets mean. The belt, sometimes his fists. He says it's my fault, says I'm worthless, says I'm just like my father. There was a pause. Denise's voice, soft and careful. Did he ever hit you anywhere other than your arms and back? My ribs. A couple times. I had a black eye once. And you ran away? Tonight was the last night. I couldn't take it anymore. I just ran. I found the alley behind this garage. Did you know Marla? No, but she was there. She stopped him. She didn't even know me, and she stopped him. Marla set down the wrench. Her hands were shaking. She gripped the edge of the workbench and tried to breathe. The stairs creaked. Denise came down. Leo followed behind her, his face pale but calm. He looked at Marla. Something passed between them. Something quiet and solid. Denise walked over. She spoke low enough that Leo couldn't hear. Marla, I've seen a lot of these cases. Your place is clean. It's warm. He has his own bed, his own space, fresh food in the fridge. You have no record of violence. Ruth speaks highly of you. And most importantly, that boy trusts you." Marla swallowed. "What happens now? I'm going to sign off on an emergency temporary kinship placement. He stays here with you pending a formal home study next week. I'm also filing a motion to restrict Frank's custody rights immediately. Based on Leo's statement, he won't have any legal standing. He's not the biological father. And he has a documented pattern of abuse." Marla felt something in her chest loosen, a knot she hadn't even realized she was carrying. "So he stays?" "He stays. For now. We'll do the full home study next week, but I don't anticipate any problems." Denise held out her hand. Marla took it. The handshake was firm. "I'll have the paperwork delivered by tomorrow morning," Denise said. "You'll need to sign a few things. I'll walk you through it. Thank you." Denise smiled. "You're doing something good here, Marla, I can tell." She walked to her car. Marla stood at the door and watched her go. The little blue sedan pulled out of the lot and headed down the road. The sun broke through the clouds just then, sending a column of light down onto the gravel. Marla turned around. Leo was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He was crying, silent tears running down his cheeks. He didn't make a sound. Then he moved. He crossed the distance in 3 steps and threw his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her shoulder. His whole body shook with silent sobs. Marla wrapped her arms around him. She held him tight. She didn't say anything. There weren't words for this moment. She just held him. He cried for a long time. She stayed. She kept holding him. The sun came through the garage windows and warmed the floor where they stood. Finally, his trembling slowed. He pulled back a little and looked up at her, his eyes red and wet. His voice was small. "I get to stay? You get to stay." He nodded and wiped his face with his sleeve. Then, he smiled. It was a small smile, fragile around the edges. But it was real. For the first time in months, Leo believed his nightmare might actually be over. And standing there in that patch of sunlight, Marla believed it too. Tuesday morning came slow and cold. The storm from Monday had rolled through overnight, leaving the air washed clean and the streets glistening. Marla woke before her alarm, her body running on a strange new fuel she didn't quite recognize. Hope, that was what it was. She hadn't felt it in so long she almost didn't have a name for it. She moved quiet through the kitchen, heating milk on the stove. She measured out the cocoa powder, the sugar, a pinch of salt. She stirred until the milk turned rich and dark. 2 mugs, one for her, one for Leo. They had paperwork today. School enrollment, a home study. Real things, normal things. The kind of things that built a life. She climbed the narrow stairs at 6 o'clock, the mugs warm in her hands. The door to Leo's room was closed. She nudged it open with her elbow, careful not to spill. The cot was empty. The blanket was folded neat at the foot. The pillow still held the impression of his head. The window was open, propped up with the screwdriver she kept in the kitchen drawer. Cold air drifted through, carrying the smell of wet gravel and morning. And there, on the pillow, rested the vintage wrench she had given him 3 days ago. The one she had used to rebuild her first engine, the one that had belonged to her father. She had placed it in Leo's hands herself, told him it was his now, told him every good mechanic needed a tool with a history. He had left it behind. Like a note. Like a goodbye. The mugs hit the floor. Hot cocoa splashed across the wood planks. Marla didn't feel it. She was already moving, crossing the room, leaning out the window. The drop to the ground below was easy. A kid his size could do it without breaking anything. But why? She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed Ruth. No answer. She dialed Denise. Straight to voicemail. She dialed Crank. He picked up on the second ring. "Leo's gone," she said. No hello, no preamble. "What do you mean gone?" "The window's open. He left the wrench I gave him." "Crank, he's gone." The hours that followed were a blur of gravel roads and dead ends. Marla drove her truck through every street in town. She checked the bus station, the diner, the park where she'd taken him for ice cream on Saturday. She walked the alley where she'd found him, as if he might be there again, huddled against the dumpster, waiting, nothing. She called the hospital. The sheriff's office. Every number she had. No one had seen a boy matching his description. No one had heard anything. By noon, her hands were shaking. By 2, she was running on nothing but coffee and fear. She drove to the edge of town, to the old industrial strip, where the buildings sat empty and the windows were dark. She searched until her legs ached and her throat was raw from calling his name. At 4:30, her phone buzzed. "Crank found something," he said. His voice was rough, tight, Miller Warehouse, the old one on the East Road. "My buddy Vinny saw a group of guys dragging a kid inside about an hour ago. Said the kid was fighting. Said they were wearing Serpents patches." Marla's blood went cold. The Serpents, her old club. The life she had walked away from 15 years ago. She had left them behind. She had thought she'd buried that part of herself for good. The old Miller Warehouse sat on the edge of town, a hulking shape against the fading light. The windows were boarded up. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown. No cars in sight. They were hiding their vehicles somewhere else. She didn't care. She killed the engine of her motorcycle and walked toward the loading door. It was warped, rusted at the hinges. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Dust hung in the air. The light was dim, coming through cracks in the walls and the high, dirty windows. And there, in the center of the open space, Leo hung from a chain hoist. His wrists were bound with rope, his arms stretched above his head. His shirt was torn and stained with blood. His head hung forward, chin against his chest. He didn't move. "Leo," her voice cracked. His head lifted at the sound. His eyes found hers. He was barely conscious, but he was alive. Then, the headlights snapped on. Marla spun. Rows of motorcycles and trucks. Earlier they'd been hidden in the blind spots. Now they blazed to life, washing the warehouse in harsh white light. Men in leather vests with the Serpents patch on their backs. 10 of them. Maybe more. A figure stepped forward from the glare. He was lean with cold gray eyes and a face like carved stone. He wore his patch like armor. He looked at Marla with a patience that made her stomach turn. "Welcome home, traitor." His voice was gravel and ice. "Meet your victim's son." Danny Kowalski's bloodline, kept alive just to bring you here. The office smelled of dust and old cigarettes. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light across the room. Marla knelt on the concrete floor, her hands bound behind her back with plastic zip ties. Her motorcycle keys, her phone, her wallet, all of it sat in a pile on the metal desk where Ghost had dumped them. He had taken her jacket too. He had taken everything. Leo was in the corner, chained to an iron pipe that ran from floor to ceiling. The chain was wrapped around his chest, his arms pinned at his sides. His head hung forward, his dark hair matted with sweat. Even from across the room, Marla could see the flush on his cheeks. Fever. He was burning up. Ghost paced in front of her, his boots clicking against the concrete with each step. He moved slow, like a man who had all the time in the world, like a man who had waited 15 years and knew how to savor the moment. Do you know what 15 years feels like, Marla? His voice was low, almost gentle. That made it worse. Do you know what it feels like to carry a dead brother in your chest every single day? To wake up and remember that he's gone because of you? Marla said nothing. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes stayed on Leo. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Ghost stopped in front of her, crouched down until his face was level with hers. His gray eyes were flat, empty. I want you to see what you made. I want you to understand that every breath that boy takes is a reminder of what you took from me. I didn't mean to kill Danny. Her voice came out rough, scraped raw. It was an accident. We both know that. An accident. Ghost laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You threw the punch that put him in the ground. You don't get to call that an accident. You don't get to call it anything but what it is. Murder. Marla closed her eyes. She had replayed that night 1,000 times. The bar fight that got out of hand. Danny swinging first, missing. Her swinging back, connecting. The crack of bone. The way he fell. The way he never got up. She had left the club the next morning and never looked back. She had spent 15 years trying to outrun it. The two guards by the door laughed at something. They were drinking coffee from foam cups, leaning against the wall like this was just another Tuesday. Like there wasn't a sick kid chained in the corner. He's burning up, Marla said. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. He needs a doctor. Please, let me at least check on him. Ghost tilted his head, studying her like she was a bug under glass. You care about him? That's sweet. That's really sweet. He stood up, walked over to Leo, and grabbed a fistful of the boy's hair, yanking his head back. Leo groaned, barely conscious. This is Danny's kid. Danny's blood. Two birds, Marla. That's what you are to me. You took my brother, and now you're going to watch his son die, and then you're going to join him. He let go of Leo's hair. Leo's head lolled forward again. Ghost turned and walked toward the door, gesturing for the guards to follow. Give her an hour to think about it, Ghost said. Then we'll start the festivities. The door slammed shut. A lock clicked. The sound of boots faded down the hallway. Marla sat still, listening. The silence stretched. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She needed to move. She shuffled across the floor on her knees, the zip ties biting into her wrists. Every inch was a struggle. Her legs were numb from kneeling. Her shoulders ached from the angle of her arms. But she kept going, one knee at a time, until she was close enough to reach Leo. His skin was hot to the touch. She pressed 2 fingers against his neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there. Weak, but there. He was alive. Leo. Her whisper was barely a sound. Leo, I'm here. I'm going to get you out of this. I promise. He didn't respond. He couldn't hear her. But she said it anyway. She needed to say it. She needed to believe it. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know about Danny. I didn't know any of it. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, just for a moment. But I know now. And I'm still here. And I'm still going to get you out. She pulled back. She had work to do. Her boots were heavy, steel-toed, the same pair she had worn to work every day for the past decade. She curled her fingers as much as the zip ties would allow, reaching down, feeling along the inside of her right boot. There, the small lump she had sewn into the leather years ago. A tiny pocket knife, barely 2 inches long. She had forgotten it was there. Ghost had checked her pockets and her jacket, but he hadn't checked her boots. She worked the knife free with her fingertips, fumbling, almost dropping it twice. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her hands shook. But she got it open. The blade was small, dull from years of disuse. But it was steel. It was enough. She angled her wrists behind her back, found the plastic tie, and started to saw. Slow, methodical. The plastic was thick. It would take time. But she had time. She had all the time in the world. She looked at Leo, pale and feverish against the pipe. She thought about the way he had smiled when she showed him how to torque a bolt. The way he had talked about becoming a mechanic. The way he had called her Marla like she was somebody. Like she mattered. Even if he hated her when he learned the truth, she would get him out. That was the deal. That was the promise. She kept sawing. The blade bit deeper into the plastic. The first strand snapped. She kept going. The zip tie snapped. Marla's hands came free, and she bit back a gasp as blood rushed back into her wrists. Needles of pain shot through her fingers, but she ignored it. She flexed her hands, worked the stiffness out of her joints, and turned her attention to Leo. His ankle was locked in a heavy iron cuff, bolted to the same pipe that ran up to the ceiling. A thick padlock held it shut. She shuffled closer, the small knife still clutched in her hand. The blade was too dull to cut through the chain, but the padlock was old. Rusted. Maybe it would give. She pressed the tip of the blade into the keyhole and started to work it back and forth. The metal scraped against metal. A soft grinding sound that seemed louder than it was. From the next room she could hear the guards laughing, the clink of bottles. They were drunk. That was good. Drunk men made mistakes. Leo, her voice was low, barely a whisper. Leo, I need you to wake up for me. Can you do that? He stirred. His head lifted an inch, then fell back against his chest. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Marla? I'm here. I'm right here. She kept working the knife, sweat beading on her forehead. I'm going to get you out of this, but I need you to stay with me, okay? Can you do that? He blinked, trying to focus. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Then, hoarse and trembling, where are we? Somewhere we shouldn't be. But we're leaving soon. She twisted the blade, felt something give inside the lock. A click. Hope surged in her chest. Almost got it. Leo's eyes drifted to her hands, to the knife, then back to her face. Why did he keep saying my father's name? Marla's hand froze. The blade slipped, scratching her thumb. She barely felt it. Ghost, Leo said, his voice cracking. He kept saying, your father. Over and over. He said I was Danny's blood. Who is Danny? The room seemed to close in around her. The air grew thick. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, drowning out the sound of the guards' laughter. She had known this moment might come. She had known the truth would have to face the light. But she hadn't expected it here. Not like this. not with Leo's life hanging in the balance and the taste of rust and fear in her mouth. She set the knife down. Her hands were shaking. "Leo," she said, and her voice was soft in a way she didn't know she was capable of. "Danny Kowalski. That name means something to you. Do you know it?" He shook his head. "My mom never talked about my dad. She said he died before I was born. She never told me his name." Marla swallowed. The lump in her throat was so big she thought she might choke. "I knew him. I knew Danny." Leo's eyes widened. A flicker of something passed across his face. Hope, maybe, or fear. It was hard to tell through the fever and the exhaustion. "I knew him a long time ago," she continued, each word costing her something. We were in the same world. The same life. There was a feud between our clubs. It got ugly. There was a fight." She paused. The next part was the hardest thing she had ever said out loud. Harder than the confession to the judge. Harder than the phone call to her mother. Danny threw a punch. I threw one back. He fell. He hit his head on the curb. Her voice broke. He died. "Leo, I'm the one who killed your father." Silence. The word hung in the air like smoke, heavy and dark and impossible to take back. Leo stared at her. His bruised face went pale, then gray. His eyes searched hers, looking for something. A lie, a mistake, anything that would make it not true. But there was nothing. Just the truth, ugly and raw and permanent. "You," his voice was barely a whisper. "You killed my dad? It was an accident. I never meant to hurt him. But I did. I ended his life." Tears streamed down her face, hot and unchecked. "I didn't know about you. I didn't know he had a son. I didn't know any of it until Ghost said your name." He turned his head to the wall. Slow, like a man moving through water. His jaw tightened. His eyes went glassy, but not with fever anymore. With something else. Something colder. "Leo," she said, reaching for him. He flinched away, pressing himself back against the pipe. "Please, I know this doesn't change anything. I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me. But I'm still going to get you out of here. I'm still going to keep you safe. That's a promise. That's a promise I'm going to keep, no matter what." He didn't answer. He just stared at the wall, his breathing slow and shallow, his body rigid with rejection. The boy who had smiled at her. The boy who had talked about becoming a mechanic. The boy who had called her Marla like she was somebody. He was gone. In his place was a stranger, a boy who had just learned that the woman who saved him was the one who destroyed his life. Marla picked up the knife. She went back to work on the padlock. The metal scraped against metal, a harsh, desperate sound. Somewhere in the next room, the guards laughed again. But the laughter felt 1,000,000 miles away, and the silence between her and the boy who would never forgive her stretched out like a wound that would never heal. Ghost entered the office as if he owned the whole godforsaken world, which, at that moment, he probably did. He carried a cracked plastic tray with 2 bowls of something gray and lumpy. The smell of it hit Marla's nose and turned her stomach, but she didn't flinch. She kept her face blank, her back against the pipe where she'd been dumped on the floor. Her wrists were raw again. He'd retied them after he'd found her and Leo talking. "Eat," he said, setting the tray down. The bowls sloshed. Greasy water spilled over the rim. Don't want the boy passing out before the fun. Marla didn't move. She glanced at Leo. He sat against the opposite wall, knees drawn to his chest, his head hung low. The fever had spiked during the night. His cheeks were flushed, his breathing too fast. He hadn't spoken a word to her since the confession. Not one. Ghost followed her gaze and smiled. It was a thin, mean smile that didn't touch his cold gray eyes. "What's the matter? Boy won't talk to you?" Can't say I blame him. He crouched down in front of Marla, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. The stale tobacco. His voice dropped to something almost intimate. "You know what surprises me, Marla?" She didn't answer. "You're too calm," he said. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a bug under glass. "A woman in your position. Kid you're trying to save hates your guts. Guards outside are drunk and bored. You're tied up on a dirty floor." He paused, letting the words sink in. Most people would be crying. Begging, "You've been quiet as a church mouse." That bothers me. Marla let him talk. She kept her eyes on his, steady and flat. Inside, her mind was running, mapping every inch of this room, every sound, every shadow. But she gave him nothing. Ghost leaned closer. "Oh, and here's something else. Something interesting." He smiled again, showing yellowed teeth. "Seems Leo's stepdaddy came sniffing around the fence last night, walked up and down the perimeter, muttering about his missing kid. Drunk as a skunk, from what my men said." He laughed, a short ugly bark, stumbling around like a fool, calling out the boy's name. "You know anything about that, Marla?" Her heart lurched. Frank was looking for them. He wasn't a drunk stepfather at all, but an undercover ATF agent. That meant he had a plan, he had backup. He had resources. If he was circling this warehouse, maybe he was getting close. She kept her face empty. "I don't know anything about Leo's stepdaddy. Never met the man." "No?" Ghost's eyes narrowed. "Funny, because he mentioned you. Said you were the one who took his boy. Said you were a lying bitch who had no right." He watched her, waiting for a crack. She didn't give him one. "Maybe he did," she said. Then he got the story wrong. Ghost held her gaze for a long moment. The silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Then he moved. His hand came across her face so fast she didn't see it coming. The slap cracked through the room, snapping her head to the side. Pain bloomed along her jaw, sharp and hot. Her ears rang. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Ghost stood up, flexing his hand. "Don't lie to me, Marla. I know you too well." He adjusted his vest, straightened his collar, and walked to the door. He paused at the threshold. "I got business to attend to. You think about your situation. Think about that boy over there and what happens to him if you don't start being more cooperative." He stepped out. The door slammed. The lock clicked. Marla stayed still. She listened to the heavy footsteps retreat down the corridor, the muffled voices, the clink of glass, the sound of the guards settling back into their drunk, careless rhythm. She waited, counted to 60. Then she moved. Slowly, painfully, she shuffled across the floor, dragging her bound wrists until she reached the cracked window that ran along the top of the wall. No, not the window. It was boarded up. But above her, set into the ceiling, was something else. A skylight. Old, rusted, the metal frame crusted with corrosion, the glass cloudy with grime and years of neglect. It was small, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, but it was openable. She could see the hinges. She could see the gap where the seal had rotted away. She studied it, calculating the angle from the radiator to the ceiling. The height. The weight of the frame. Leo was a wiry kid, small for his age, but he was also sick. Weak. If she boosted him up, could he fit through that opening? Could he pull himself out while the fever was still burning through him? She looked at him. His eyes were closed now, but his breath still came in labored heaves. He wasn't asleep. She could tell by the tension in his shoulders. Leo. Her voice was low, barely a whisper. I need you to look at me. He didn't move. Please, the word cracked. She swallowed. I know you hate me. I know you have every reason to. But I need you to look at me. Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes met hers, red-rimmed. Hollow, he didn't say anything, but he was looking. Marla dragged herself toward the radiator. She ran her fingers along the base, feeling for something, anything. Her hand brushed against a small piece of metal wedged in the gap beneath the rusted pipes. She pried it loose, a stripped screwdriver bit, worn down, almost useless, but it might be enough. She looked up at the skylight. Then at Leo. They're going to come back, she said. When they do, we're going to be gone. Do you understand? He stared at her. Tears slid down his cheeks, but he nodded. Marla worked the screwdriver bit into the first screw on the skylight frame. The metal scraped. The screw gave a stubborn groan. She kept pushing, twisting, ignoring the pain in her wrists and the blood on her fingers. One screw. Then another. We may only have one chance at this, she whispered. I'm not going to waste it. Thursday afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. The light through the boarded windows shifted from pale to gray to a sickly amber as the hours dragged. Marla had worked the screwdriver bit until her fingers cramped. 2 screws loose, 2 more to go. She was still pulling at the third when she heard Leo start to shiver. It came on fast. Too fast. One moment he was sitting still, staring at nothing, and the next his whole body was shaking, his teeth chattering hard enough to click. His face had gone from flushed to waxy pale, sweat beading on his forehead in fat droplets. Leo. She abandoned the skylight and dragged herself across the floor, the rope biting into her raw wrists. She reached him just as he toppled sideways, his head lolling against the grimy concrete. Leo, look at me. His eyes were open but unseeing. They rolled, glassy and unfocused. His lips moved, forming words that came out in a dry rasp. Mama, I didn't mean to. Marla's chest tightened. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. He was burning, the kind of heat that meant real trouble. Infection, dehydration, something worse. Leo, stay with me. She shook him gently, but he didn't respond. He just kept muttering, his voice fading in and out like a bad radio signal. Mama, don't go. Please don't go. She looked around the room. A bucket in the corner, mostly empty. A rusted pipe running along the wall. No water. No medicine. Nothing. She scrambled to the door and pounded her fist against the metal. Hey! Hey, I need help in here! The pounding echoed down the hallway. She heard muffled voices. Laughter, then footsteps, slow and deliberate. The door creaked open. Ghost stood there, leaning against the frame, his cold eyes flicking from Marla to Leo on the floor. A lazy smile curved his mouth. Something wrong? He's burning up, Marla said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was hammering. He needs medicine. Water. Clean water, at least. He's delirious. Ghost glanced at Leo, then back at her. He shrugged. Boy's still breathing. That's all I need. He just has to make it to dawn. Are you out of your mind? He's a kid. He'll die if. Then he dies. Ghost's voice was flat, uninterested. He's a means to an end, Marla. You're the one I want. The boy's just garnish. He turned and walked away. The door slammed. The lock clicked. Marla stood there, her fists clenched, fury burning through her veins. She wanted to scream, to tear the door off its hinges, but that wouldn't help Leo. She needed to think. She looked around the room again. The walls were concrete block, painted a faded institutional green that was peeling and stained. Electrical conduit ran along the top of the wall, gray metal pipes carrying wire to a single overhead light fixture that buzzed and flickered. Near the window, there was an outlet. Cracked, exposed, the cover plate was missing, revealing the guts of the wiring inside. Her mind clicked into gear. She'd been a mechanic for 20 years. She knew how electricity worked. She knew what happened when you shorted a circuit. She glanced at Leo. His shivering had gotten worse. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. He was muttering something about his mother again, his words slurring together. Marla shuffled across the floor, dragging herself toward the outlet. She scanned the room for wire. There was a length of it coiled near the radiator, old and frayed, maybe from an abandoned repair job. She grabbed it, testing the length. 8 inches. 10. Enough. She worked quickly, her fingers clumsy with pain and desperation. She stripped the insulation with her teeth, exposing the bare copper. She twisted the ends together, creating a loop. Then she jammed one end into the outlet's hot slot and the other into the neutral. Nothing happened. She twisted the copper tighter, pressing harder. A spark. A hiss. The overhead light flickered violently. Then the wire glowed red, smoking, the smell of burning plastic filling the room. Sparks erupted from the outlet, popping and snapping, sending a shower of orange onto the floor. The wall began to smoke. The conduit overhead started to hum, then whine. Marla yanked her hand back just before the current could grab her. She covered her mouth, coughing as the smoke thickened. Voices in the hallway. Boots pounding. A key scraping in the lock. The door flew open. A guard stood there, a burly man with a thick beard and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He took one look at the smoking wall, the electrical fire arcing and spitting, and cursed. What the hell? He ran to the outlet, scanning the room. He spotted the wire, still smoking. He reached for it, then stopped, realizing it was still live. He turned to find a breaker panel, but there wasn't one in the room. He'd have to go to the main box. "Stay here," he barked, pointing at Marla. "Don't move." He bolted out the door, leaving it open behind him. For a precious second, Marla saw the empty hallway, the exit sign at the end, the dark corridor beyond. Then the guard's footsteps faded. The door swung slowly, clicking but not fully closing. The lock didn't catch. Marla's heart pounded. She lunged for the door, grabbing it before it could swing shut. She held it, barely breathing, listening. Down the hall, she heard the guard yelling about a fire. Shouting, the sound of someone running. Then, silence. No footsteps. No voices. Just the crackle of dying sparks from the smoking outlet. And a soft sound, like paper sliding across concrete. Marla looked down. A folded piece of paper lay on the floor just inside the doorway, as if it had been slipped beneath the door in the chaos. It was crisp, new, covered in a rough hand-drawn map. A warehouse layout. Rooms marked with X's. A single exit drawn in red ink, and a line of handwriting at the bottom, scrawled in a hurried, jagged script. Midnight, be ready. Marla stared at it. Her hands were shaking. She didn't know who had left it. Crank, maybe. Or Frank. Or someone else entirely. But it didn't matter. It was a way out. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the inside of her boot, pressing it flat against the leather. Then she crawled back to Leo. He was worse now. His eyes were closed, his skin hot and dry. His breathing had become shallow and uneven. She gathered him in her arms, cradling his head against her shoulder, rocking him gently. Leo, listen to me. Her voice was low and fierce. Help is coming. You just have to hold on a little longer. Do you hear me? Just a little longer. For a long moment, he didn't respond. She felt his chest rise and fall. Shallow, but there. Then, weakly, his hand closed around hers. It wasn't much. But it was enough. The hum of the overhead light died first. It didn't flicker or sputter. It just stopped, like someone had reached up and pinched the sound out of existence. The bulb went dark, and the room plunged into a black so thick Marla couldn't see her own hands. Then the sirens started. Not police sirens. These were different. Louder, more aggressive. They blared somewhere outside the warehouse walls, filling the air with a wailing chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. Shouting erupted in the corridors. Boots pounded against concrete. Marla pressed Leo tighter against her chest. His body was still burning with fever, his breath coming in short, wheezing gasps. She could feel his heart pounding against her palm, rapid and weak. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know, kid." She pulled him closer, shielding him with her body. "But stay quiet." The shouting grew louder. She could hear Ghost's voice somewhere down the hall, barking orders. "Check the perimeter. Find the source." Then came the crash. It was a heavy, grinding sound, metal giving way under force. A side door, somewhere to her left, burst open with a deafening slam. Flashlight beams swept through the darkness, cutting across the hallway in sharp white columns. Marla squinted against the light. She could see shapes moving. 3 of them. Long guns. Tactical vests. Helmets. One of them broke away from the others and came straight toward her. He moved with purpose, his footsteps steady and sure. When he reached the doorway, he dropped to one knee, bringing his flashlight up. The beam hit her face, and she flinched. "Marla?" The voice was familiar. It was a voice she'd heard before, slurred and angry, shouting obscenities across a dingy living room. But this time, it was clear. Sharp, sober, frank? She breathed. He pulled off his helmet. The flashlight illuminated his face. It was the same face she'd seen at Leo's house, but different somehow. Tired, hard, but his eyes weren't dulled with alcohol. They were bright and alert. He turned the beam toward Leo, inspecting him with quick, practiced movements. He checked his pulse, his breathing, the fever radiating off his skin. His jaw tightened. "Get the medical kit," he ordered, and one of the other officers sprinted off without hesitation. Frank looked at Marla then, straight in the eyes. His voice was low and intense. "Is he conscious?" "He was a minute ago." "He's fading." Frank nodded. He reached down and grabbed a pair of bolt cutters from his belt. He moved to Leo's ankle, where a cheap metal chain held him to a pipe bracket bolted to the floor. Leo stirred at the touch, his eyes fluttering open. He saw Frank's face and recoiled, terror flashing across his features. "No," he whimpered. "No. Not you. Please, don't, Leo." Frank's voice was steady, but there was a crack in it. A break. "Leo, look at me." Leo shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. You're not here. You're not real. I'm real. And I'm sorry." Frank's hands were steady as he positioned the bolt cutters around the chain. "I'm so sorry, son." The metal snapped with a sharp crack. The chain fell away from Leo's ankle, revealing raw, angry skin underneath. Leo stared at Frank, confusion and fear warring in his eyes. I don't understand." Frank reached into his vest and pulled out a badge. It caught the flashlight beam, glinting gold. He clipped it to his belt, where it hung alongside his sidearm. "My name is Agent Frank DeLuca," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I'm with the ATF. I've been investigating the Iron Serpents for 2 years. I'm taking you both home." Marla stared at him. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She'd seen a lot in her life. Too much. But this. Frank moved to help her lift Leo. The boy was heavy, but between the two of them, they got him upright. Leo's arm draped over Marla's shoulder, his feet barely able to hold him. "Can you walk?" Frank asked. "I'll crawl if I have to," Marla said. He nodded. "We're not done yet. There's a van waiting at the back exit. But we've got to move fast." They stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dark, lit only by the sweeping beams of the officers' flashlights. The sound of tactical boots echoed around them, filling the space with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. Behind them, somewhere in the warehouse, Ghost's voice rose above the chaos. "Find them. Find them now." Frank didn't look back. He just kept moving, one arm supporting Leo, the other gripping Marla's elbow, pulling her forward into the darkness. The corridor stretched ahead, a dark throat of concrete and shadow. Marla's boots slapped against the floor, each step sending a jolt through her spine. Leo's weight pressed down on her shoulder, his feet dragging, his breath a ragged whisper in her ear. Frank moved beside her, his flashlight cutting a path through the gloom. The two officers flanked them, weapons raised, scanning every doorway, every shadow. The shouting behind them grew louder, closer, north stairwells clear, one of the officers said into his radio. "Moving to loading bay 4. Frank pressed his free hand against Marla's back, guiding her around a stack of rusted pallets. "Keep moving, don't stop." Marla's lungs burned, her arms ached, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Leo's life depended on every step she took. They rounded a corner. The corridor opened into a wider passage, lined with steel doors on either side. Some hung open, revealing empty rooms filled with shadows. Others were sealed shut, rusted handles frozen in place. Frank's radio crackled. A voice came through, tinny and urgent. "We've got movement on the south perimeter. Serpents are regrouping. You've got maybe 3 minutes before they block the exits." Frank grabbed Marla's arm, pulling her toward a door marked with faded letters. Loading, he shoved it open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, washing over her sweat-soaked face. She gasped, drinking it in. But Frank didn't stop. He pushed forward, leading them through the doorway into a vast, open space. The loading bay. High ceilings. Concrete floor. A massive roll-up door at the far end just barely cracked open, letting in slivers of moonlight. Marla's legs trembled. She sagged against a support pillar, pulling Leo down beside her. He slumped against her chest, his eyes half closed, his skin pale and clammy. Frank knelt in front of them, checking Leo's pulse again. His jaw was tight. He's dehydrated. Fever spiking. We need that van. Marla looked at him. Really looked at him. The square jaw, the tired blue eyes. The badge clipped to his belt, glinting in the dim light. 18 months, she said, her voice hoarse. You said 18 months. Frank didn't look away. 23, actually. I started counting the day I married his mother. Marla's breath caught. You married her to get close to the serpents. I married her to protect her. His voice cracked, just slightly. She was a witness. She saw something she shouldn't have. I was supposed to keep her safe, but the serpents found her anyway. They killed her for it. I couldn't. He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't let them take Leo too. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and painful. Marla's chest tightened. She'd spent years running from her past, from the things she'd done, the people she'd hurt. And here was this man, carrying a burden just as heavy. Why Leo? She asked. Why me? Frank met her eyes. Because you're the only one they'd never look for, the only one who could keep him hidden, and because I knew you'd protect him. Marla shook her head. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. I know you left the serpents. I know you never looked back. And I know you walked through hell tonight to save that boy. He reached out, his hand resting on her shoulder. It was warm. Steady. That's enough for me. Leo stirred in her arms, his eyelids fluttering open. He looked up at her, his eyes glassy but aware. Marla? I'm here, kid. He tried to smile, but it came out weak and shaky. Knew you'd come. Marla's throat tightened. She pulled him closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. His hair was matted with sweat, but he was alive. He was breathing. Frank stood, his radio crackling to life again. Bravo team, this is Alpha. Status on extraction. Static, then a voice. 2 minutes out. Hang tight. Frank nodded, turning back to Marla. 2 minutes. She nodded. She could do 2 minutes. The loading bay was silent except for the sound of Leo's breathing and the distant echo of shouts somewhere behind them. Marla held him tight, her eyes fixed on the crack in the roll-up door, on the sliver of night air that promised freedom. Then she saw it, red and blue lights flickering through the gap. Distant at first, then growing brighter. The low rumble of an engine, tires crunching over gravel. Leo's eyes widened. He lifted his head, a fragile hope flickering across his face. Is that them? Marla smiled. She couldn't help it. Yeah, kid. That's them. He leaned into her, his small hand gripping her shirt. And for the first time all night, his breath came easier. Steadier, the van pulled up to the door, headlights cutting through the fog. Frank moved to the rollout, pulling it open with a loud, grinding screech. The night air flooded in, cool and clean. Marla struggled to her feet, lifting Leo with her. He was lighter than he should have been, too thin, too fragile. But his feet touched the ground, and he took a step. Then another. Frank was there, steadying him on the other side. Together, they guided him through the gap in the door, out into the open night. Leo looked back at Marla, his eyes meeting hers. And he smiled. A real smile. Weak, trembling, but real. Thank you, he whispered. Marla didn't have words. She just nodded, pulling him close as the van doors opened and hands reached out to help them inside. Their hands were already reaching out. Warm hands. Helping hands. Marla felt herself being lifted, Leo pressed against her chest, the musty smell of the van filling her lungs. She could hear the engine rumbling, the driver shouting something about a hospital district. Then the lights came on. Every single one. The floodlights snapped on all at once, mounted high on the warehouse walls, blasting the bay with blinding white light. Marla squeezed her eyes shut, but the light burned through her eyelids, hot and searing. She heard Frank curse, heard the officers shout, heard the van's engine rev, then die. The enormous roll-up door slammed down, slamming into the concrete floor with a boom so loud the whole building shook. The van windows rattled. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Leo gasped. He pressed his face into her shoulder. She could feel him trembling. And then, from overhead, a voice. Well, it came through hidden speakers, crackling and tinny, but unmistakable. It was the voice she'd heard on the edge of sleep for 15 years. The voice that had followed her through every bad dream, every restless night. Ghost. Marla's blood turned cold. Look at you, all dressed up like heroes. My heart's bursting. Laughter echoed through the bay. It was ugly, scraping laughter, sliding over concrete like oil. Marla spun. She had to see him. She searched the darkness beyond the light and saw him. He was at the far end of the bay, standing next to a stack of shipping crates, a dozen men behind him, vests, patches, weapons, humming like a swarm of black hornets. The men appeared from everywhere. They were walking from behind the crates, keeping a steady line, closing in on the bay. Suddenly, the places surrounding them. One officer raised her weapon. Ghost looked his way lazily. He raised a hand, almost bored. The officer's gun was knocked loose by a shot from the shadows. Frank pulled Marla and Leo up against the side of the van. Marla's mouth was dry as concrete. Her ears rang. Ghost whistled. Gull sing-song sound. Frank, Ghost said. He stepped off a crate and started walking toward them, hands in his pockets. Or should I say, Agent DeLuca. How's the back? Must be sore. All that lying. Marla's stomach dropped. Ghost kept walking, the speaker leveling the words, his bootsteps echoing through the bay. Did you think I didn't know? He asked. Did you really think I didn't see you circling my territory like a vulture? Frank's jaw was tight. You don't know anything. Oh, I know everything. Every transmission. Every radio check. Every little plan. Right down to that charming little story about the drunk stepfather. Ghost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I have a friend in the local sheriff's office. Nice girl. Very expensive habit. She's been feeding me your message traffic for months. Frank grew still. His eyes went from Ghost to the officers. His hands wrapped around Leo, sheltering him further out of sight. His body coiled. So I let you run, Ghost said. Followed your little breadcrumb trail here. Watched you come into my warehouse. And now, he spread his arms wide, here we are. All of you. In one place, no cameras, no witnesses, just me and my boys and all my loose ends. He stopped at the foot of the bay door. He looked at Marla. Something in his eyes went flint hard. It's been 15 years, Marla, he said softly. Danny's blood asks for it. Tonight I'll give it to it. Marla stepped forward. Her legs shook, but she forced her body to move. Ghost. It was an accident. It was a fight with him. I didn't know. I know exactly what you didn't know, Ghost said, his voice dropping. A small black pistol appeared in his hand from inside his jacket. He raised it, aimed not at her, but at Frank. The way he moved, the casual gesture, pulled that trigger, the shot cracked through the air. Frank's radio exploded on his belt in a spray of plastic and sparks. The officer beside him swayed. One hand dropped to his side where red blooms across his coveralls. He went down onto one knee, then onto his side. He didn't move. Frank grabbed Marla, and he shoved them. The world blurred. She hit the ground, was pulling behind a big metal drum. An oily, damp smell filled her nose. She pulled Leo up against it, her arm wrapped around his back, pressing his face into her shoulder. She looked at the other officers. They were flat on the ground, and he was reaching for their weapons. They hadn't fired. They couldn't. Because the men were closing in on every door, shotgun butts, chains, knives glinting in the floodlights. 12 of them. 24 more in the shadows behind them. Ghost walked up to the drum, his footsteps measured, echoing slow. He looked down, softly. I want to say something about this, he said, his voice a whisper of joy. The last thing all of you will ever hear. He moved past, standing in the open, his hands clasped behind his back as the night air, the bay alarm, the cool air surround the place. No one is leaving alive, he said, a cold smile stretched across his face. Not you. Not the cop. And especially not the boy. Rough hands grabbed Marla before she could move. Fingers dug into her arms, yanking her up from behind the drum. She heard Leo cry out, a small scared sound that cut straight through her chest. She tried to hold on to him, but they were already pulling them apart. No, she shouted. Leave him alone. A fist slammed into her gut. The air left her lungs in a rush. She doubled over, gasping, and the hands dragged her across the concrete floor. Her knees scraped. Her boots left streaks in the dust. They tied her to a steel support beam near the back wall. Thick rope bit into her wrists, pulled tight behind the cold metal. She could feel the vibration of the building through her spine, the hum of machinery somewhere above them. Ghost's men threw Frank down in the middle of the floor. He hit hard, grunting, landing on his knees. One of the men yanked his arms behind his back and wrapped plastic zip ties around his wrists. They pulled them so tight Frank's jaw clenched, but he didn't make a sound. Then they brought Leo. He was limp between two men, his head hanging, his feet barely touching the ground. They dragged him across the bay and tossed him onto a filthy mattress that lay against the far wall. The springs groaned, dust puffed up around him. Leo curled into a ball, his arms wrapped around his ribs. Marla's heart twisted. She strained against the ropes. Leo, look at me. He didn't move. His breathing was shallow, rattling in his chest, like every breath cost him something. Ghost walked across the floor. His boots echoed slow and even. He stopped in front of Frank, looking down at him like a man inspecting a broken tool. You know, Ghost said, I liked you. When you first came around, playing the drunk, playing the stepfather who couldn't hold his liquor. I thought, there's a man with a talent for lying. Frank stared straight ahead. His face was hard, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. But you weren't lying for the club, were you? Ghost crouched down, bringing his face close to Frank's. You were lying for a badge. For a government that doesn't care about you. That will forget you exist the moment you stop being useful. You don't know what you're talking about, Frank said, his voice flat. Don't I? Ghost stood up slowly. He paced, his hands clasped behind his back, circling Frank like a shark. Loyalty. Frank, that's what separates men from animals. The club is family. We bleed together. We die together. And you wormed your way in, ate our food, drank our beer, and sold us out to the highest bidder. Frank said nothing. Ghost stopped pacing. He tilted his head, looking at Frank through narrow eyes. But I'm not going to kill you yet. I want you to watch first. I want you to see the boy die. Then the woman. Then I'll save you for last. Marla's stomach turned. She pulled harder at the ropes, feeling them burn her skin, feeling blood start to slide down her wrists. Ghost, this is between us. Frank doesn't matter. The boy doesn't matter. Let them go, and you can do whatever you want to me. Ghost turned toward her. His smile was slow, cold. Oh, Marla, that's very noble. But we both know that's not how this works. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. He looked at her the way someone looks at an old wound. You killed Danny, he said softly. You took my brother. And now you want to make a deal? You want to trade your life for theirs? He shook his head. You don't get to choose the terms. You lost that right 15 years ago. He turned away, walking toward the far wall. Marla watched him bend down and pick up a red plastic container. A gasoline can. He carried it to the nearest wall and unscrewed the cap. The smell hit her nose. Sharp, chemical, familiar, Ghost began walking the perimeter, tipping the can as he went. Gasoline splashed along the concrete walls, pooling in dark puddles on the floor. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man watering a garden. Every few steps he shook the can, sending a wider spray across the wall. Marla watched the fuel creep along the floor, black and glossy, spreading toward the center of the bay. She heard Leo cough. He was struggling to sit up on the mattress, his hands pressed against his chest, his face pale and slick with sweat. Please, Leo whispered. He was barely audible. Please, I can't breathe. Ghost stopped. He looked back at the boy with mild interest. You won't have to for much longer, he said. He finished his circuit, returning to the center of the bay. He set the gas can down on the concrete with a hollow clank. He looked up at the high ceiling, where the first hint of gray was beginning to creep through the dirty windows. Dawn is about an hour away, Ghost said. He pulled a lighter from his pocket. It clicked once, twice, a small flame dancing at the tip. He held it up, watching it flicker. And at first light, I'm going to light a match. This warehouse will burn. Everything in it will burn. You, me, the boy, the cop. Every loose end, gone in one fire. He snapped the lighter shut and pocketed it. Just sit tight, he said, smiling. This will all be over soon. He walked away, disappearing into the shadows with his men following close behind. The roll-up door groaned and opened, letting in the cold morning air, and then it slammed shut again, sealing them inside. The bay fell silent. The only sound was Leo's ragged breathing and the soft drip of gasoline pooling on the concrete floor. The bay was a tomb of shadow and spilled fuel. The gasoline smell clung to the back of Marla's throat with every breath. She strained against the rope, feeling the fibers bite into the raw flesh of her wrists. A warm trickle of blood slid down her forearm and dripped onto the concrete. Frank was on his knees in the center of the floor, facing away from her. But the warehouse was quiet now, and sound carried in the dark. Marla. His voice was low, barely a murmur. Can you hear me? Yeah. Her own voice came out rough, cracked. I hear you. I have a pick. He shifted slightly, turning his head toward the sound of her voice. In my boot sole, sewn into the leather. But my hands are zipped tight. She looked at her own bindings. Thick rope, wrapped around the beam. She could feel the edge of a metal bracket behind her, a rusted bolt jutting out from the support column. Can you reach it? She asked. Your boot? Not with these ties. But if I can get to the fuel line on the east wall, there's a cutoff valve. If I can break it free, we can use the leak. Set it off the right way. Maybe cause enough chaos to get loose. Marla's mind worked fast. She flexed her hands, feeling the rope shift. Frank, crawl toward me. I can reach your boot if you get close enough. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Leo on the mattress. He was still curled into himself, his body shaking. His breathing came in wet, rattling gasps. Leo, she called softly. Hold on, kid, just hold on. He didn't answer. His eyes were closed. Frank began to move. He dragged himself across the concrete on his knees, his bound arms behind him, his body swaying with effort. Each movement was slow, painful, the zip ties dug into his wrists. Sweat beaded on his forehead. When he reached her, his boot was within reach. Marla stretched her leg, twisting her body against the beam. She couldn't reach with her hands, so she used her boot heel. She pressed down on the sole of Frank's boot, feeling for a gap in the leather. Talk to me, she said. Her voice strained. Where exactly? Inside edge. Right at the arch. She hooked her heel against the seam. She pushed hard, feeling the leather separate, a small object sliding out into her soul. I got it, she breathed. Good, now I need to reach the east wall. The line runs along the floor. If I can grab the valve, I can pull it loose. Marla's eyes darted to the far wall. Dawn was still an hour away, but the shadows were growing thinner. She could see the dark shape of the fuel line running along the base of the wall, old and rusted, with a small valve that had been patched with duct tape. I'll make noise, she said. Draw their attention. You sure? I was a Hell's Angel, Frank. Noise is all I know. She started to struggle. She pulled against the ropes with all her strength, twisting her body, grunting with effort. The beam rattled. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. She yelled, loud and rough, a sound that echoed through the bay. Hey, Ghost, you coward! Come face me yourself. Frank moved. He dragged himself toward the east wall, his body scraping across the concrete, leaving a smear of gasoline and dust behind him. He reached the valve and fumbled with the pick, working it against the zip ties on his wrists. Through the wall, Marla heard boots on gravel. The roll-up door rattled but held. A voice shouted something she couldn't make out. Then, she heard it. A rattling gasp, wet and terrible. She snapped her head toward Leo. He had fallen off the mattress, lying on his side on the concrete. His skin had gone gray, the color of ash. His chest barely moved. Leo, she screamed. He didn't respond. The roll-up door started to open. Ghost's men filed in, their boots heavy on the concrete. One of them was carrying a metal can, screwing the cap shut. Another man flicked a lighter open and closed. Open and closed. The small flame danced in the dim light. Frank was still working at his ties. His movements were frantic. Marla looked down at the floor. The gasoline had spread in a dark sheet, covering the concrete in a slick black film. It was everywhere. Under her boots, under Frank's knees, under the mattress where Leo lay. The plan that had felt so solid a minute ago now felt impossible, a fragile hope built on rusted pipes and desperate lies. Ghost's men poured the last of the gasoline across the floor at the entrance, a wet hissing sound that filled the bay. Marla's heart pounded as she watched Leo's chest rise and fall and rise again, each breath shallower than the last. The lighter clicked open, closed, open, closed. Dawn came slow and gray through the high windows, but Ghost brought his own light. A road flare hissed in his grip, spitting orange sparks into the dim air. The glow danced off the gasoline-slicked floor, turning the bay into a sea of firelight and shadow. Ghost stood in the doorway, his lean frame silhouetted against the pale sky beyond. His men had stepped outside, their boots crunching on gravel. They stood in a loose semicircle, arms crossed, watching through the gap like spectators at a show. "Time to say goodbye, Marla." Ghost's voice was low, almost gentle. He held the flare higher. "You always were a sentimental woman. I figured you'd want a proper send-off." Marla pressed low behind the derelict engine block, her shoulder pressed against Frank's. The rusted metal was cold against her back, but it was the only cover they had. Leo lay between them, his body limp, his breathing shallow. She had her hand on his chest, feeling each week rise and fall. She'd used Frank's pick to cut her ropes, then his bindings too. It had taken seconds that felt like hours, working in the dark while Ghost talked to his men outside, promising them a show. Frank was still breathing hard, his face pale, blood matting his hair from a gash across his temple. He was watching Ghost with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who'd spent years lying to dangerous people. "His breathing is getting worse," Marla whispered. "That gas. He's been breathing it too long." Frank nodded slowly. "We need to get him out of here." Now, Ghost took a step into the bay. The flare hissed and crackled, sending a shower of sparks onto the concrete. They landed in the gasoline and fizzled out, small orange flowers that died in the slick. "3," Ghost said. "That's how long I'll give you. 3 breaths to say your goodbyes." He lifted the flare higher. The light caught his face, hard lines and cold eyes. 2. Marla's mind raced. Her hands were free now, but her legs were weak from the ropes, her muscles cramping. She scanned the floor around her, pieces of scrap metal, a rusted wrench. And there, half buried under a pile of rags, a grinding wheel. Heavy, discarded, useless, unless you knew how to use it. 1. Ghost's arm tensed. He was pulling back, ready to throw the flare into the gasoline at his feet. Marla moved. She lunged for the grinding wheel, wrapping her fingers around its rough edge. The weight was solid, familiar. She'd spent a lifetime throwing her weight around. This was no different. She swung her leg back and kicked. The wheel shot across the concrete, spinning, scraping, sending a shower of orange sparks flying in its wake. Ghost saw it. His eyes widened. He took a step back, but it was too late. The sparks hit the gasoline vapors. For a moment, nothing happened. Just a hiss, a flicker. Then the flame caught. But instead of rushing inward toward her, the fire roared outward. It raced across the bay toward the open door, following the fuel spill that pooled thickest near the entrance. The cross-draft from the broken windows pulled the flames in a sheet of orange and blue, a wall of fire that roared between Marla and Ghost. The fireball erupted with a sound like thunder. Heat slammed into Marla's face, and she threw herself over Leo, shielding his body with her own. The air around her turned to fire and smoke. She felt the burn of it on her arms, on the back of her neck, but the flame had already moved past them, devouring the fuel line and the gasoline pooled at the entrance. Ghost screamed. He stumbled backward, bathed in the light of his own funeral pyre. His men scattered, shouts and boots on gravel, the roar of engines starting up outside. Then there was silence, broken only by the crackle of burning fuel and the distant sound of sirens wailing somewhere in the city. Marla lifted her head. The bay was filled with smoke, but the fire was contained. It had blown outward, not inward. The cross-draft had saved them. She'd spotted it in the way the dust settled, the way the air moved from the broken windows to the open door. It was the same skill she used to read an engine, to know which part was worn just by listening. Frank was on his feet, hauling Leo up into his arms. The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, but alive. "Frank," Marla said, her voice hoarse. He's breathing." Frank's voice was rough, but steady. "We need to get him out of here." Now, Marla pushed herself up and followed. Smoke curled through the warehouse like a living thing. It stung Marla's eyes and clawed at her throat. The fire still crackled near the entrance, but the fuel had burned itself out. What remained was the thick, choking dark. Marla grabbed Leo's arm and pulled him up. His body was limp, too heavy for his thin frame. She bent her knees and heaved him over her shoulder in a fireman's carry. His breath hitched against her back, a small, ragged sound that cut straight through her. "Hold on, kid," she rasped. "Just hold on." Frank was already moving. His wrists were still bound by a few loops of rope, the ends frayed and useless, but his hands worked fine. He grabbed a steel pipe from the floor, heavy and rusted. It felt good in his grip. Familiar, two men burst through the smoke. Serpents, they had come back through the flames, their faces twisted with anger. One carried a crowbar. The other held a knife. Frank didn't wait. He swung the pipe low and hard. It caught the first man across the knees, sending him crashing to the concrete. The second man lunged, crowbar swinging. Metal clashed against metal with a sound that rang through the bay. Frank gritted his teeth and pushed forward, driving the man back with a quick, brutal jab to the ribs. "Go." Frank shouted. "Side exit. Go." Marla did not argue. She ran. Her boots slipped on the slick floor. Smoke filled her lungs, but she kept moving. Leo's weight pressed down on her shoulder, his arms dangling, his head lolling. She could feel his heartbeat against her collarbone. Weak, but there. Behind her she heard the pipe connect again. A cry of pain. Then footsteps. She reached the side wall. The plywood barrier was old and rotten, nailed over a door that had not been used in years. Frank had marked it in his note. A small, faded X in the corner. She had memorized every detail of that note. Marla stepped back and kicked. The wood splintered, light spilled through the cracks. She kicked again, and a whole section gave way, falling outward into the gray morning air. "Frank!" She yelled. He was there, suddenly, at her side. Blood ran down his face from the gash on his temple. His fists were raw. The pipe was gone, lost somewhere in the fight. But his eyes were clear. "Go," he said. "I'm right behind you." Marla pushed through the broken barrier. Cold air hit her face. It was the sweetest thing she had ever felt. The world opened up around her, wide and gray and quiet. Grass under her boots, the smell of dew and diesel and freedom. She took 3 steps into the open. Then she heard it. A sound she had known her whole life. The sharp crack of a gunshot. Marla froze. She turned. Frank stood in the doorway, his body blocking the opening. His shoulder snapped back as the bullet tore through him. He grunted, a low sound of pain, but he did not fall. Behind him, Ghost emerged from the smoke. His clothes were singed. His face was black with soot, but his eyes burned with a cold, terrible light. He raised the gun again. Frank did not stop to think. He grabbed the heavy metal shelf beside the door. It was rusted and bent, covered in years of grime, but it was solid. He threw his weight into it, shoving it hard. The shelf tipped. It fell with a scream of old metal, crashing down onto Ghost's legs. The gun fired again. Wild, the bullet burying itself in the dirt beside Marla's foot. Ghost howled in fury and pain, trapped beneath the weight. Frank sagged against the doorframe. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and spreading. He looked at Marla, and his eyes were soft, almost gentle. "Go," he whispered. He shoved the door open with his body, the broken plywood scraping against the ground. It was enough. Marla turned and ran. She ran with Leo in her arms, her boots pounding against the grass. She ran until her legs screamed and her lungs burned. She ran until she could not run anymore. Then she dropped to her knees. The grass was cold and damp beneath her. She laid Leo down gently, her hands trembling as she checked his face. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, dazed and pale. "Marla?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here," she said. "I've got you." She looked up. The sky was brightening, the clouds turning silver and gold, and in the distance, dozens of sirens wailed, growing louder with every passing second. The sirens swelled into a roar. Blue and red lights painted the gray morning in strokes of color. SUVs with federal plates screamed to a stop, their doors flying open before the tires even quit spinning. Agents in tactical gear poured out. They moved in formation, rifles up, voices sharp and calm. One of them spotted Marla on her knees in the grass and broke away from the pack. His boots crunched through the dew as he ran toward her. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Marla shook her head. "The boy, he needs help. And there's a man inside. Officer Frank DeLuca. He's shot." The agent's face went tight. He spoke into the radio on his shoulder, his words fast and clipped. Within seconds, 2 paramedics sprinted past them, carrying a red bag and a backboard. They worked on Leo with quick, practiced hands. One of them slid a needle into his arm. The other wrapped a cuff around his bicep and watched the numbers climb on a small screen. They talked in low voices, but Marla heard the important words. Oxygen saturation low. Starting IV. Let's move. Leo's eyes were open now, glassy and confused. He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed him back down. "Easy, son. You're safe now." Marla knelt beside him. She took his hand, the one without the needle, and held it between both of hers. His fingers were cold. Too cold. "I'm here, Leo. I'm not going anywhere." The paramedics lifted him onto the backboard. It only took moments, but it felt like hours. They carried him across the grass, the stretcher wheels humming as they rolled toward the open doors of the ambulance. Marla stood. The world tilted for a second, but she steadied herself. She followed them. "Ma'am, you need to step back," one of the paramedics said. "We need room to work." Marla looked at him. Her eyes were hard and tired, but there was no anger in them, just a quiet certainty. He's my boy. I'm riding with him. The paramedic hesitated. He glanced at his partner, who gave a small nod. All right, stay out of the way. Marla climbed into the back of the ambulance. She sat on the narrow bench beside Leo, her knees almost touching the gurney. The doors slammed shut. The engine rumbled to life. The driver hit the siren. It wailed once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm as the vehicle pulled onto the road. Inside, the world narrowed down to the sound of the monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen. Leo's chest rose and fell. His eyes were closed again, but his hand moved, finding hers. "Hey," she whispered. "Hey kid, you hear me?" His fingers squeezed, weak but there. "I'm right here. Just breathe. The oxygen will do its work." The paramedic watched the screen. His face was calm, but his eyes were focused. He adjusted the flow of fluids and made a note on a chart. "He's stabilizing," he said. "His vitals are improving. Good job keeping him alive back there." Marla did not answer. She kept her eyes on Leo's face, on the small flutter of his eyelashes, on the color slowly returning to his cheeks. She brushed his hair back from his forehead. It was damp with sweat and soot, but it was soft underneath. He looked so young, too young for any of this. "We made it," she whispered. "You and me, we made it." The monitor beeped. Steady, regular, the paramedic let out a small breath and relaxed his shoulders. His heart rate is leveling out. Oxygen is up. He's going to be okay. Marla closed her eyes just for a moment. She let the words wash over her like rain. She looked out the rear window of the ambulance. The world was a blur of gray and green, but behind them, a second ambulance was pulling onto the road. Its lights flashed red and white against the brightening sky. Through the windshield, she could see a figure in the back. Frank. He was propped up on a stretcher, his face pale and streaked with blood. A paramedic worked on his shoulder, but Frank's eyes were on her. He raised his free hand. Slow, painful, but deliberate. He gave her a thumbs up. Marla lifted her own hand. She pressed it against the glass. She did not smile. But something in her chest loosened, just a little. The ambulance sped on. The sirens faded into the rhythm of the road, and Leo kept breathing, steady and true, his hand in hers. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a low buzz that had drilled into Marla's skull hours ago and refused to leave. She wore borrowed green scrubs that were too short in the sleeves and too tight across her shoulders. Her own clothes were in a plastic bag somewhere, stained with smoke and blood. She paced, back and forth. 12 steps to the wall. 12 steps back. The clock on the far wall said it was just past 7 in the evening. She had been here for 8 hours. The same 8 hours that felt like 8 days. Other families sat in the plastic chairs. A mother held a sleeping toddler. An old man stared at the television mounted in the corner, the volume so low it was barely a whisper. No one looked at Marla. No one asked why a woman in scrubs was wearing grease-stained work boots. She stopped pacing when the doors at the end of the hall swung open. The surgeon was a small woman with tired eyes and a surgical cap still tied around her neck. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. Marla crossed the room in 3 strides. The boy. "Leo, how is he?" The surgeon looked up. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "He's out of surgery. He had a ruptured spleen. We had to remove it. He also has 3 cracked ribs, and there was some internal bleeding, but we got that under control." Marla's knees went weak. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "He's alive?" "He's alive." He's in recovery now. He'll need several days of monitoring, maybe longer. But he's young and strong, and his vitals are improving by the hour. Marla let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her whole body sagged. The tears came before she could stop them. They rolled down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the grime and soot. "Can I see him?" The surgeon hesitated. "He's resting, but you can sit with him for a few minutes. Just don't wake him." Marla nodded. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The surgeon led her down a long hallway, past rooms with closed doors and quiet machines, until they reached a small room at the end. Leo lay in a narrow bed, surrounded by monitors and tubes. An IV dripped clear fluid into his arm. A bandage wrapped his chest. His face was pale, but his breathing was even. Steady, Marla pulled up a chair and sat beside him. She took his hand, the one without the needle, and held it between both of hers. "Hey, kid," she whispered. "You did good. Real good. Just rest now." She stayed until a nurse came and gently told her it was time to step out. Marla nodded and squeezed Leo's hand one last time before letting go. She walked back to the waiting room on autopilot. The clock said it was almost 8 now. Her legs felt like lead. She sank into a plastic chair near the window and stared at the darkening sky. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes, maybe longer. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Frank walked through the doors. His left arm was in a black sling. His ATF jacket hung over his shoulders, draping him like a cape. There was a fresh bandage on his cheek, and his face was drawn with exhaustion, but he was on his feet. That was something. He crossed the room slowly. Each step seemed to cost him something. When he reached her, he lowered himself into the chair beside her with a grunt of pain. "How's Leo?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he'd been swallowing gravel. "He made it. Surgery went well. He'll be okay." Frank closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, there was something in them she hadn't seen before. It could have been relief. It could have been sorrow. Maybe both. "Good," he said. "That's good." They sat in silence for a while. The television hummed. The clock ticked. Marla felt the exhaustion pulling at her bones, but she couldn't sleep. Not yet. Frank shifted in his seat. He turned to face her, wincing as his arm protested. "Marla, I owe you the whole truth." She looked at him. Her eyes were tired and red-rimmed, but they were steady. "I'm listening." Frank took a breath. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "The man you saw in the alley, the drunk who was beating Leo. That was never real. I played a part, a role I've been playing for years." Marla frowned. Her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Frank leaned forward. His voice dropped low, barely above a whisper. "I'm an undercover agent with the ATF. I've been tracking the Serpents for a long time. Ghost, his operation, everything. Leo's mother married me to protect him from that world. When she died, I became his guardian. But I couldn't keep him safe and work the case at the same time. So I set up a story. A cover. I made myself look like the villain so that when Leo ran, he would run to the one person in town I knew would protect him." Marla stared at him. Her mind turned the words over, trying to make sense of them. "The one person," she repeated slowly. "Me. You. Your reputation. The things people say about you. The way you defended him in the alley. I knew if he showed up at your garage, you would take him in. You would see the good in him. and you would keep him safe. Marla's throat tightened. 1,000 emotions swirled in her chest. Anger, confusion, relief, but underneath it all, a strange and fragile warmth. You put him through that, she said. Her voice cracked. You let him think you were going to hurt him. Frank's jaw tightened. Yes, and I'll live with that for the rest of my life. But I did it to save him. And looking at how you care for him now, I know I made the right choice. Marla sat back in her chair. She looked out the window at the city lights blinking in the distance. You could have just asked me, she said quietly. You could have told me the truth. Frank shook his head. Ghost has eyes everywhere. I couldn't risk it. Not with the boy's life on the line. Marla nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place. The lies, the secrets, the pain. It was a heavy weight to carry. But it was a weight she understood. She turned back to Frank. Her face was softer now, but her eyes were still guarded. Now what? She asked. Frank looked at her. Something passed between them, a shared understanding, an unspoken vow. Now we make sure Leo has a safe place to call home. Together, Saturday morning arrived with a soft golden light that spilled through the hospital window and pooled on the white sheets. Leo blinked awake slowly. His body felt heavy, wrapped in bandages and wires. The monitors beeped in a steady rhythm beside him. For a moment, he did not know where he was. Then, he remembered. The warehouse. The ropes. The pain. And then Marla's voice, strong and fierce, cutting through the darkness. The door opened. Marla stepped in first, her face tired but soft. Behind her came Frank. Leo's breath caught. He tensed, his hands gripping the sheet, but Frank looked different. He wore plain jeans and a dark blue button-up shirt. No jacket, no badge, no weapon. His left arm hung in a black sling, and a fresh bandage sat on his cheek. He looked smaller somehow. Less like the monster Leo had feared, more like a man who had not slept in days. Marla pulled a chair close to the bed and nodded at Frank. He sat down slowly, wincing, as he settled. His eyes were tired, but they held something Leo had never seen in them before. Gentleness, Leo, Frank said. His voice was low and rough. I need to tell you the truth. Leo said nothing. He watched Frank with wary eyes, his heart pounding beneath the bandages. Frank took a breath. My name is Frank DeLuca. I'm an agent with the ATF. I've been working undercover for years, tracking the Iron Serpents. Leo blinked. You're a cop? A federal agent? Yes, Frank leaned forward. I married your mother to protect you. After your father Danny died, the Serpents were watching your family. Your mother was scared. She didn't want you to grow up in that world, so I came in. I gave her a safe home. I gave you a name that wouldn't draw attention. Leo's throat tightened. You're not my stepfather? I am. Legally, but not the way you think. Frank's voice cracked. When your mother got sick, I promised her I would keep you safe. I meant it. I still mean it. Leo looked away. His eyes burned. Then, why did you hurt me? Why did you pretend to be drunk and beat me in that alley? Frank closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, they were wet. Because the Serpents found out where we lived. Ghost knew who you were. He knew you were Danny Kowalski's son. He was planning to take you, Leo, to use you against Marla. I couldn't let that happen. But I couldn't protect you and work the case at the same time. So I made a choice. A terrible choice. Marla reached out and placed her hand on Leo's arm. Her touch was warm. Frank continued. I staged that night. I made myself look like the villain. I made sure you would run. And I made sure you would run to Marla. Leo's brow furrowed. How did you know I would go to her? I knew her reputation. I knew she was a former Hell's Angel. I knew she was tough enough to stand up to anyone. And I knew something else. I knew she had a good heart. The kind of heart that would take in a scared boy and protect him with her life. Leo looked at Marla. She met his gaze, and he saw the truth in her eyes. She had been there. She had saved him. She had hidden him. She had taught him to turn a wrench and laugh again. You let me think you were a monster, Leo said, his voice shaking. You let me hate you. Frank nodded slowly. Yes, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. But I did it because I love you, Leo. You are not my son by blood. But you are my son in every way that matters, and I would do it again if it meant keeping you alive. The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft beeping of the monitors and the distant hum of the hospital. Leo stared at Frank. His chest ached, but it was not from the surgery. It was from the weight of everything he had just heard. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell Frank to get out and never come back. But the anger would not come. Because underneath the pain, underneath the years of fear and confusion, there was something else. A small, fragile feeling that he had almost forgotten. Relief. The man who had hurt him was not a monster. He was a man who had tried to save him. The bruises and the fear and the nights spent hiding in Marla's spare room had all been part of a plan to keep him safe from something far worse. Tears rolled down Leo's cheeks. He did not try to stop them. He looked at Frank, then at Marla. Two people who had risked everything for him. Two people who had chosen him. I don't know what to feel, Leo whispered. Marla squeezed his hand. You don't have to know right now. You just have to rest. We're here. We're not going anywhere. Frank reached out and gently placed his hand over Leo's. His touch was light, careful, like he was afraid the boy would break. Take your time, son. We'll be right here when you're ready. Leo stared at Frank. The tears kept coming, silent and steady. He did not know if he felt betrayed or relieved. Maybe both. Maybe that was okay. For the first time in a long time, he did not have to run. He did not have to hide. He just had to breathe. And so he did. The afternoon light shifted across the hospital room floor, painting long golden rectangles on the tile. Frank stood up slowly, carefully, favoring his injured arm. He looked at Marla and gave her a small nod. Then he looked at Leo. I'll be right outside if you need anything, Frank said. Leo watched him go. The door clicked shut behind him, and then it was just the two of them. Marla sat in the chair Frank had left. She scooted it closer to the bed, close enough that her knees almost touched the railing. Leo fiddled with the edge of his blanket. What did he mean about Ghost using me against you? Marla let out a long breath. She placed her hands on her knees and stared at them for a moment. Her hands were rough and stained with grease that never quite washed out. She had been using those hands for 30 years to fix things, to build things. But once, a long time ago, she had used them to hurt someone. Leo, she said, her voice low and steady. There's something I need to tell you. About your father. Leo looked up. His eyes were wary, but he did not look away. Marla took a breath. 15 years ago, I was a different person. I was in a motorcycle club called the Serpents. I was angry and young, and I thought the club was my family. I thought being tough meant being feared. She paused. The words sat heavy on her tongue. It happened during a fight between clubs. Stupid, over territory and pride and things that did not matter. There was a man named Danny Kowalski. He was on the other side. Leo's breath caught. That's my dad. Yes, Marla nodded slowly. He was your dad. The room felt very quiet. Marla could hear the steady beat of the heart monitor, matching the beat of her own guilty heart. I threw a punch, Leo. One punch. I did not mean to kill him, but I knocked him off balance, and he fell. He hit his head on the curb. Her voice cracked. He died that night. Leo stared at her. His face was unreadable. She forced herself to keep going. I served time. I left the club. I changed my name and my life and everything about who I was, but I could not change what I did. I have carried that guilt every single day for 15 years. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. She clasped them together. I am not telling you this to ask for your forgiveness. I would never ask for that. I just needed you to know the truth. Because you deserve the truth about your father. His name was Danny Kowalski, and from everything I have heard about him, he was a good man. He loved your mother. And he would have loved you. Leo was silent for a long time. The only sound was the soft hiss of the machines and the murmur of voices somewhere down the hall. Marla sat very still, waiting. She had faced down bikers and threats and the cold fear of the warehouse. But this was harder. This was the moment she had dreaded for 15 years. The moment when someone looked at her and saw the killer she used to be. Leo shifted in the bed. He winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. Then he looked at her. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Ghost told me things, Leo said quietly. He told me you were the one who killed my dad. Marla's throat closed. She nodded slowly. I didn't believe him, Leo continued. Not at first. I thought he was lying to get inside my head. But then I remembered what my mom told me once. She said my dad died in an accident. She never said how. She never said who. Marla wanted to look away, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. Frank told me, Leo said, that you were a good person, that you had a good heart. I didn't understand how he could know that. But now, I do. He reached out. His hand was small and thin, covered in scrapes and small cuts from the ropes. He placed it on top of Marla's rough, calloused hand. You saved me twice, Leo said. Once in the alley, once in the warehouse. You did not have to. But you did. Marla stared at him. Her chest ached with a feeling she could not name. Dad would have seen the good in you, Leo whispered. I know he would, because I see it too. 15 years of guilt, 15 years of nightmares and sleepless nights, 15 years of believing she was a monster who could never be forgiven. It all cracked open in that moment, right there in the golden afternoon light. Marla broke down. The tears came hard and fast, shaking her whole body. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold them back, but they would not stop. Leo squeezed her hand. He did not let go. It's okay, Leo said softly. It's okay. Marla sobbed. All the words she had held inside for 15 years poured out in the only way they could. In tears, in the warmth of a boy's hand holding hers, in the quiet miracle of forgiveness given without being asked. She looked up at Leo. Through the tears, she saw him smiling, a small, tired smile. And in that moment, Marla understood. She did not have to be perfect. She did not have to erase the past. She just had to keep showing up. She had to keep choosing to protect. And maybe, just maybe, That was enough. 1 week later, the morning sun spilled through the windows of the garage apartment like warm honey. The walls were no longer the tired beige Marla had lived with for years. They were soft blue now, the color of a clear sky. She had painted them herself, 3 coats, while Leo slept on the couch downstairs. The room smelled like fresh paint and lemon polish. A new bed stood against the wall with a thick quilt folded at the foot. A bookshelf sat in the corner, filled with old car manuals and a few novels she had picked up at the thrift store. On the wall above the bed, Leo had hung 2 posters. A cherry red Mustang. A vintage Camaro. The tape was crooked, but he did not care. Leo sat on the edge of the bed, running his fingers over the soft fabric of the quilt. His stitches were smaller now. The bruises on his face had faded from purple to a sickly yellow. He still moved slowly, carefully, but he was healing. Marla stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The look on her face said everything. "You like it?" she asked finally. Leo looked around the room. His eyes landed on the bookshelf, the posters, the clean blue walls. Then they landed on her. "It's perfect," he said. Downstairs, the smell of eggs drifted up the stairs. Someone was cooking. Leo looked at Marla with a question in his eyes. "Frank came by early," Marla said. "Said he wanted to make breakfast. I told him he did not have to. He said he wanted to." Leo smiled, a small, real smile. The apartment door opened, and Denise walked in. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard that seemed permanently attached to her hand. She wore a sensible gray jacket and carried a thick folder under her arm. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up. "Smells good in here," she said. Marla came down the stairs, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Frank's in the kitchen." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Frank DeLuca, the undercover agent?" "The same," Marla said. "He's making eggs." Denise followed her into the small kitchen. Frank stood at the stove in a plain gray t-shirt and jeans. No leather vest, no fake beard, no act. He looked like a regular man, tired but at peace. He flipped an egg with a spatula and glanced over his shoulder. "Morning." "Denise." "Morning." "Frank." She set her folder on the small table and sat down. Marla poured 3 cups of coffee. Leo came down the stairs slowly, holding the railing, and sat at the table. Denise opened the folder. She looked at Marla, then at Frank, then at Leo. "I'm going to be honest with you all," she said. "This has been a complicated case. Frank's undercover role made things messy. Legally, his custodial claims were tangled up in the operation, and Leo has no other living relatives who can take him in." Leo looked down at the table. Marla put her hand on his shoulder. "But," Denise continued, "I've reviewed everything. Frank has voluntarily stepped back from any custodial claim. He told me in writing that Marla is Leo's emotional anchor, that she is the one who kept him safe, that she is the one he trusts." Marla blinked. She looked at Frank. He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "I meant what I said," Frank told her. "You're the one who saved him. You're the one he belongs with." Denise slid a stack of papers across the table. "I've fast-tracked an emergency kinship guardianship order. It's temporary for now. But if everything goes well, it can become permanent." Marla stared at the papers. Her hands trembled slightly. She had faced down a warehouse full of bikers. She had walked into danger without blinking. But this piece of paper, this small stack of words, scared her more than anything. What if I mess up? she asked quietly. Denise smiled. Everyone messes up. That's not what this is about. This is about showing up. And you have shown up, Marla, every single time. Frank turned off the stove. He slid the eggs onto plates and brought them to the table. Then he stood back and watched. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go look at the room." The four of them walked up the stairs. The morning light streamed through the window, falling across the Mustang posters. The blue walls glowed like the sky after a storm. The bookshelf stood neat and full. The bed was made, the quilt smooth. Denise handed Marla the papers. Marla took them with both hands. Her rough, grease-stained fingers held the edges carefully, like the paper was made of glass. Leo stood between Marla and Frank. He looked at the room, he looked at the posters, he looked at the two people beside him. Then he took a deep breath. "I'm home," he said. The words hung in the air, soft and true. Marla felt her eyes sting. She blinked hard. Frank put his hand on Leo's shoulder. "I want you to know something," he said. "I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to vanish like I did before. I'm going to be in your life, not as a case, not as an assignment, as family." Leo looked up at him. His voice was small. "Really? Really," Frank said. "I promise." Leo nodded. Then he looked at Marla. She held the papers against her chest, close to her heart. "Okay," Leo said. "Okay," and in the soft blue room, with the sunlight on the Mustang posters and the smell of eggs drifting up from the kitchen, the three of them stood together. Not as bikers, not as cops, not as victims, just as people who had chosen each other, just as a family, finally finding its way home. 2 months later, a bright Saturday morning spilled over the street like a promise. The shop awning had been repainted. The old faded letters were gone. Now it read, in bold red and white, Voss and Leo's Garage. Marla stood at the edge of the parking lot, coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold. It was a warm day, the kind of day that made people want to be outside. And outside was exactly where everyone was. A long folding table sat under the awning, covered with a red checkered cloth. Paper plates and plastic forks lined the edge. Mrs. Gable from 2 streets over carefully placed a cherry pie at the center of the table. The crust was golden. The edges were crimped perfect and even. She stepped back and admired her work. "That's a beauty, Mrs. Gable," Marla said. Mrs. Gable waved a hand. "Pie is the least I can do. You fixed my son's truck for half the price the other shop quoted. He drove it to church last Sunday." He could not stop smiling. Marla nodded. She did not say much. She never did. But a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Other neighbors wandered in. The man from the corner store brought a tray of sandwiches. A woman from the bakery dropped off a box of coffee cake. Veterans from the local hall came too, men and women in faded caps and clean shirts. They patched tires and changed oil alongside Marla in the weeks after the warehouse. They knew her story. They did not judge. They only showed up, and that meant more than anything. A low rumble echoed down the street. Marla turned. A motorcycle approached, polished and gleaming. The rider pulled into the lot and killed the engine. It was Crank, his gray beard thicker than ever, his belly straining his worn leather vest. He swung off the bike with a grunt and walked to the back of his trailer. "Brought you something," he called out. He lifted a chrome grille from the trailer. It was vintage, wide, and curved, with lines like a smile. A Mustang grill from 1965. Marla's breath caught. "Where did you find that?" she asked. Crank grinned. "Been holding on to it for 20 years. Figured it belonged here more than in my shed. This place is gonna be a landmark." He set the grill down by the front door. It caught the sunlight and threw it back in soft flashes. Marla ran her fingers over the chrome. It was cool and smooth. "I don't know what to say," she said. "Say you'll let me eat some of that pie," Crank said. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Near the side of the shop, Leo was crouched beside an old sedan. The tires were flat on one side. A younger kid, maybe 9 or 10, stood beside him, watching every move. The kid's eyes were wide and curious. "See this gauge here?" Leo said. He held up a small silver tool. "You press it against the valve stem. Firm. Like this. And it pops up to show the pressure." He pressed the gauge to the tire. The little stick jumped. The kid gasped. "Whoa, it moved." "Yep, that means the tire has air, but not enough. Go too low and you'll ruin the wheel. Go too high and the ride gets bumpy. You got to hit the middle. That's the sweet spot." The kid nodded seriously. "Can I try?" Leo handed him the gauge. "Slow and steady. You got it." The kid pressed it against the valve. The gauge popped. His face lit up. "I did it. Now you know how to check every tire on the street," Leo said. He patted the kid's shoulder. "Pretty good skill." Marla watched from the lot. The boy in the coveralls with Leo stitched on the chest was not the scared kid she had found in an alley. He stood taller now. His shoulders were back. He taught the younger boy with patience, with kindness, with the same steady calm Marla had tried to show him. Her eyes stung. She blinked it away. At noon, the sound of footsteps on gravel made her turn. Frank walked up the street carrying a wicker picnic basket. He wore a plain white shirt and jeans. No badge, no act, just a man on a Saturday with food. "Delivery," he said, holding up the basket. Mrs. Gable clucked her tongue. "That's a fine basket. What's inside?" Frank lifted the lid. "Roast beef sandwiches, potato salad, some ginger ale." "Ginger ale?" Marla raised an eyebrow. "For Leo," Frank said. "His favorite." Leo heard his name and jogged over. His face split into a wide grin when he saw Frank. "Did you get pickles?" Leo asked. Frank grinned. "Two kinds. Dill and bread and butter." Leo pumped his fist in the air. The three of them walked to the front stoop of the shop. The concrete still held some warmth from the morning sun. They sat in a row, side by side, the wicker basket between them. Frank handed out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Leo bit into his and closed his eyes. "Okay," he said with his mouth full. "This is the best thing I have ever eaten." Marla laughed. She could not help it. The sound surprised her. It had been a long time since she laughed like that. They ate together in the shade of the awning. The street hummed with soft chatter. Someone turned on a radio. A gentle country song drifted through the air. The pie was cut and served. Crank had 2 slices and asked for a third. Marla looked at the street. She looked at the neighbors, at the veterans, at the kids crowding around Leo to ask about engines. She looked at Frank, chewing his sandwich, and at Leo, telling a story with his hands flying. Then she took a breath. A deep one. The kind she used to take before a fight. But this time, there was no fight. There was only peace. A quiet, solid peace that settled in her chest and did not move. She felt it. Truly felt it. Peace, not a map to somewhere else, not a way out, just the calm of being exactly where she was supposed to be. From inside the shop, a wrench clanged against an engine block. The sound rang out, steady and sure. Someone working, someone building. Leo looked at Marla and grinned. "We open for business," he said. Marla nodded. "Yes, we are," and the laughter rolled over them like warm light. And the promise of more mornings like this, one careful repair at a time. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.